when that Gulfstream G650 roared to life on the private tarmac at Austin Bergstrom International Airport, ready for takeoff, my phone buzzed. It was an encrypted alert from the deep firewall of my estate's security system. Just 20 minutes earlier, I had hugged my son, Julian, and handed his wife, Chloe, an American Express Centurion card with no limit. They were supposed to be flying to a top-tier luxury wellness resort in Sedona for a 2-week trip to celebrate their third wedding anniversary. I smiled as I watched them board, playing the part of the generous, easygoing, retired father getting ready to hand over his life's work. But now, a chilling line of code flashed on my phone screen. Someone using an internal IP address from my estate on Lake Travis was aggressively downloading my core business secrets and the founding documents of my family trust. I pulled my Porsche Panamera onto the shoulder of Interstate 35, the blistering September Texas sun baking the roof of the car. As a founder who spent 30 years grinding in Silicon Valley before building a massive logistics and data center empire here in Texas, my hands have always been rock solid. But right then, as I unlocked my phone and connected to the hidden security feed I designed myself, my fingertips were betraying me, trembling against the glass. What I saw on that screen made my heart stop, only to restart with a cold, blinding fury I hadn't felt since fighting off hostile corporate takeovers back in the 90s. Julian and Chloe weren't on a plane to Arizona. That boarding pass was nothing but a distraction. They were standing right inside my private underground study. Chloe was holding a bottle of my rare 1990 Romani Conti, the exact bottle I saved to open on my 70th birthday. She hadn't just uncorked it. She was carelessly pouring the ruby red wine into a cheap coffee mug. She even spilled some on a $100,000 hand-woven Navajo rug, laughing it off with total indifference. I turned up the volume on my phone. The hidden microphone captured their conversation in crystal-clear high definition. Julian was sitting in my Eames lounge chair, his feet propped up on my solid walnut desk, playing with a 3D-printed synthetic mold. It was a replica of my right index finger's fingerprint. He looked like an entirely different person from the grateful son I just saw at the airport. The face he spent so much money maintaining was twisted in pure contempt. "Are you sure the old man went to play golf?" he asked. Chloe smirked, her sharp voice sounding like nails on a chalkboard. "Of course. His calendar shows he's playing 18 holes with the mayor. He thinks we're in the air right now. By the time he drags his fragile body back tonight, we'll have long secured the keys to the cold storage crypto wallets from his biometric safe." Then she said something that altered the entire trajectory of my life. She glanced toward the hidden camera, entirely by accident, and raised her mug of Romani Conti as if toasting the empty room. "Here's to the organic detox smoothies," Chloe said. "I tripled the dosage of thallium this morning, plus the digitalis extracts. Julian, just 3 more days of this, and his heart failure will look like the most natural age-related complication. The medical examiner will just see an old man who suffered from chronic nerve pain and a bad heart, peacefully passing away in his sleep. In 3 days, that $20 million hole we lost in the Bahamas will be completely erased, and a billion-dollar logistics empire will be ours." I sat there on the side of the highway, heavy semi-trucks roaring past and shaking my car, but inside I felt an absolute deafening silence. My only son, the boy I raised alone, acting as both mother and father after his mom died of breast cancer, the son who racked up massive debts messing around with a failed cryptocurrency project at Stanford, where I didn't hesitate to step in with cash to clear the dangerous threats hanging over his head. The son whose monthly spending reached hundreds of thousands of dollars to fund his wife's lifestyle blogging career, while I just looked the other way because I was a lonely old man who wanted a family. He wasn't just stealing my money. He was systematically, deliberately ending my life. I watched the screen as Julian laughed, kissed Chloe, and called her an absolute genius. He said he couldn't wait to put me in the dry Texas dirt so they could sell the ranch to developers and buy that Miami super yacht he'd been eyeing. I turned off the phone screen. I didn't scream, and I didn't cry. With an unsettling calmness, I pulled the backup SIM card out of my phone, snapped it in half, rolled down the window, and flicked the pieces straight into the roadside drainage ditch. The Arthur Sterling, who desperately wanted to be a loving father, died right there on the shoulder of E35. The man left behind was the ruthless Arthur Sterling, who used to corner competitors in boardrooms until they lost everything. They wanted to stop my heart. Instead, they just woke it up. Before I tell you exactly how I began dismantling their lives piece by piece, without them suspecting a thing, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to completely cut a toxic person out of your life to save yourself. Hit that like button and subscribe. I pulled back into traffic, but I didn't take the next exit to go home. Going home now meant walking straight into a trap. If I walked through that door, I would have to confront them. They would lie, or worse, they might panic and use direct means to finish the job. Direct confrontation is an amateur's game. True destruction is a professional craft, and in this arena, I am the grandmaster. I needed to think. My mind raced backward through the last 6 months. The unexplainable hair loss, the tingling and numbness in my fingers and toes, the constant tightness in my chest, and Chloe's sudden, unsettling obsession with my health. She insisted on personally making me an organic detox smoothie every single morning. "It's the latest antioxidant formula, Dad. It'll help ease your nerve pain," she would say with that incredibly sweet smile. I had thanked her, drinking down every last drop of her supposed kindness. Every sip I took was just digging my own grave. And then there was Dr. Vince, Julian's college fraternity brother, the so-called elite private concierge physician in Los Angeles. He dismissed my symptoms as early-stage Parkinson's with mild cardiac strain, putting me on a heavy regimen of sedatives. That wasn't a misdiagnosis. It was a conspiracy. I drove right past the Austin downtown exits and kept heading south toward San Antonio. I needed a base, a war room. But first, I needed to know exactly how much time I had left. If the thallium and digitalis had already caused irreversible damage, I could collapse before my plans were even set. I pulled up to an unassuming cash-only private urgent care clinic on the outskirts of San Antonio. This place was far away from anyone who knew the name Arthur Sterling. I used a fake name, paid cash, and requested an immediate, comprehensive heavy metal and toxicology blood panel. The nurse gave me a strange look, a man sitting in a plastic chair, smelling of bleach and cheap disinfectant, wearing a $6,000 custom Brioni suit. While waiting for the results, I went to the convenience store across the street and bought a prepaid burner phone. My hands were completely steady now. A highly complex, devastating plan was already beginning to unfold in my mind like the layers of an onion. I sent a text to the only loyal person left on my estate, my ranch foreman, a military veteran named Jorge. "I am safe. Act normal. Do not let them suspect anything. I am watching." Jorge's daughter, Elena, was attending college in Houston with her tuition fully funded by me. If Julian found out Jorge was feeding me information, he wouldn't hesitate to target her. Jorge was the only person I could trust right now. The doctor called me into his office. His face was dead serious, and he asked if I worked in a semiconductor chemical plant or a rodenticide factory. I shook my head. He slid the report across the desk to me. The thallium levels in my blood were right on the edge of lethal, and they also detected high concentrations of digitoxin. The combination was brilliant. The thallium destroys the nerves and organs, while the digitoxin triggers cardiac arrest. For an elderly man with a known history of heart issues, it was the perfect recipe for a natural death that no medical examiner would question. The doctor told me I needed to go to an emergency room immediately for blood dialysis. He said these levels were incredibly dangerous, and I could suffer a sudden cardiac event at any moment. I looked him dead in the eye and told him I would take care of it. I demanded he write me a heavy prescription for Prussian blue, the antidote for thallium poisoning, along with detoxifying, chelating agents. He hesitated, but the thick stack of $100 bills I placed on the desk helped him find his pen very quickly. I walked out of that clinic holding 2 bottles of medication and what amounted to a death sentence for my son's future. They thought I was an old, blind, forgetful target, but they forgot one crucial thing. Before I was a father, I was a shark, and right now there was blood in the water. I booked the penthouse suite at the Ritz-Carlton in downtown San Antonio under the name of a dormant shell company I registered 20 years ago, paying with older bills kept in the emergency safe in my trunk. The Texas night air felt heavy as I stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights. I opened my laptop and connected directly to my home security server via a secure VPN. This redundant system, which completely bypassed the main network, was something I wired myself. It was originally built to protect against corporate espionage, but it turned out to be the very thing that caught the thieves inside my own house. I pulled up the live feed again. They were still in the study. Julian was using a voice modulator, mimicking my voice perfectly to call my private wealth manager. I listened as he perfectly recreated my firm Texas accented tone. Authorize the transfer of $1 million in liquid funds to the backup account in the Caymans. Yes, execute it immediately. He was entirely too good at it. He had clearly been practicing for months using voice recordings of me. Chloe was sitting at my desk, flipping through my private trust files. She picked up my charitable foundation agreement, sneered, and fed it straight into the paper shredder. She muttered that they needed to forge a new will tonight and backdate it by a month. She said she wanted everything: the estate, the shares in the logistics company, my vintage Porsche collection. She said she didn't want to leave a single penny to the Texas Children's Hospital. I watched them erase my legacy and tear down my entire life. A cold smile began to spread across my face. They were too greedy, and they were moving too fast. And in their absolute desperation to take everything, they were making fatal mistakes. I picked up the burner phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. Eleanor Carter, my former chief legal counsel. In the corporate world, they called her the Texas Rattlesnake, because once she locked her jaws onto a target, her venom would completely paralyze them, and she never let go. Eleanor picked up on the second ring. She sounded completely stunned. "Arthur, is that you?" I told her to stay quiet and listen. I told her I needed her to open a file immediately. Not a defense file, a war file. She asked who we were suing. I stared at the screen, watching my son lift my glass in celebration, and told Eleanor, "We aren't suing anyone. We're hunting." I told her to meet me at the hotel in an hour with her absolute sharpest forensic accounting team. After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of pure water and swallowed the first dose of Prussian blue. The pill was bitter and chalky, but I needed to start flushing the poison out of my veins immediately. I took one last look at the monitor. Julian was holding the empty bottle of Romani Conti, looking completely satisfied. "Enjoy it, son," I whispered into the empty room. "That's the most expensive sip of wine you'll ever have. It just cost you $1 billion inheritance." I sat down at the desk and opened a blank document. I typed out a single title: The Icarus Protocol. Step 1 was complete. I knew the truth. Step 2 was setting the stage. I needed to give them exactly what they wanted. I needed to play the victim. If they wanted a helpless, dying old man, I was going to give them an Oscar-winning performance. I would make them believe they had won. I'd let them sign those forged documents. I'd let them transfer the funds. I'd let them dig their own graves so deep that they would never see the light of day again. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the bank. The $1 million transfer Julian authorized had cleared. $1 million. It was a massive amount of money, but to me, it was just the bait. I closed my eyes, mapping out the chessboard in my mind. I was already 3 moves ahead of them. Tomorrow, I would plant the seed of their destruction. I would leave a digital paper trail that wouldn't lead them to my wealth, but rather into a massive, legally binding trap so complex that even the top white-collar defense attorneys in New York couldn't save them. The night grew late, and the city lights flickered far below me. I felt a strange surge of energy rushing through my body. The heartbreak was completely gone, replaced by pure, crystallized adrenaline. They wanted to inherit my empire. Fine. I was going to show them exactly how I built that empire in the first place, by being the most ruthless man in the room. Tomorrow the game begins, and I never lose. Driving east along Interstate 10, I left that toxic house behind me. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel of the Porsche, so tightly my knuckles turned white. But what made them shake wasn't just the anger. It was the extreme weakness I had been hiding for the past 6 months. As the adrenaline from discovering the truth on the roadside began to fade, the harsh reality of my physical condition hit me like an avalanche. My chest tightened, feeling as though an invisible iron band was slowly constricting my ribs. My vision blurred intermittently, turning the oncoming headlights into blinding streaks of white glare. For 6 months, I had convinced myself this was just the price of aging. I was 68. I had lived my entire life under high pressure. I accepted the idea that I was simply fading away, but now, remembering the image of Chloe, pouring that heavy metal powder into the blender, every single symptom took on a sinister new meaning. The constant nausea wasn't a stomach issue. The metallic taste in my mouth wasn't a side effect of blood pressure medication. The brain fog that made me forget where I put my keys or what day of the week it was wasn't early onset Alzheimer's. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being murdered. I needed definitive, uncorrupted answers. I couldn't go to the major hospitals in Austin or Dallas, where my name was carved into the donor walls. I couldn't see any doctor who might know Julian or have access to my electronic medical records. I needed a ghost. I needed Elias Ayres. Elias was an old friend from my days in the Marines. He used to be a brilliant combat medic and toxicology expert, but after dealing with PTSD and a brutal divorce, he dropped off the grid, moving out to the wilderness outside Houston to run a quiet, underground private clinic. He didn't ask questions, he didn't care about health insurance, and he only cared about the truth of chemical reactions. As a heavy downpour began to flood the roads, I pulled into the gravel driveway of his secluded farmhouse. The entire house was completely dark, except for a single light shining from a converted garage that served as his clinic. I stumbled out of the car, my legs feeling as heavy as lead. When Elias opened the door, his eyes widened. He didn't see the powerful Texas business titan. He saw a man on the brink of death. He helped me into the examination room. It was a modest setup, smelling strongly of rubbing alcohol and old books. I sat on the examination table covered in sterile paper, trembling uncontrollably despite the heat running in the room. Elias didn't waste time on small talk. He took one look at my pale skin, the spiderweb veins on my cheeks, and my shaking hands, and went straight to work. He rolled up my sleeve. His movements were highly professional, but I could feel the deep anxiety radiating off him. He asked me what I had been eating. I told him nothing out of the ordinary, except for the detox smoothies my daughter-in-law made for me every morning. She told me they were packed with super antioxidants to help me sleep. Elias frowned, drawing vial after vial of dark red blood. He took a sample of my hair, examined my fingernails, and pointed to the white horizontal lines running across them. Lines I had assumed were just a calcium deficiency. Mises lines, he murmured, the classic textbook signature of thallium exposure. The waiting was the hardest part. Elias went into the back lab to run a rapid toxicology screening. I sat alone in the silence, listening to the rain violently drumming against the metal roof. That was the moment the doubt began to creep back in. Had I gotten it wrong? Was the security footage just a hallucination? Was I actually losing my mind? Maybe I was just a paranoid old man who couldn't accept that his time was up. I looked down at my hands. They looked like a stranger's hands, old, withered, and weak. I thought about Dr. Vince, Julian's friend, the fraud who sat in my study 3 months ago, looking at me with deep sympathy as he told me I was suffering from aggressive early-stage dementia. He prescribed sedatives and told Julian to take over my finances because the stress would only end my life sooner. Vince wasn't just Julian's college buddy. They had lost millions together in the crypto market. How much did Julian pay him? Was it a direct bribe, or a promise to let him manage the medical fund of the Sterling Family Trust once I was gone? The sting of the betrayal hurt far worse than the poison. Vince used his medical license to validate my murder. He created the perfect cover story. If I died of a heart attack, no medical examiner in Texas would ever perform an autopsy on an elderly man with a documented history of heart failure and dementia. It was the perfect crime. The door opened, snapping me out of the downward spiral. Elias walked back in. He wasn't holding a clipboard. He held a single printout covered in raw data. He didn't sit down. He stood right in front of me, took off his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He told me to listen very carefully. He said the thallium concentration in my blood was 30 times the normal limit. He also found significant levels of digitoxin. I stared at him. I don't take digitoxin. My heart isn't that bad, I said, my voice sounding raspy and unfamiliar. Elias nodded, his face grim. He said he knew. Digitoxin causes severe arrhythmias in a healthy heart, and combined with the thallium weakening the blood vessels and damaging the cardiac muscle, it was a ticking time bomb. He looked at me with a sharp intensity that chilled me to the bone. He said, "If you had stayed home tonight, and if you had taken one more of those smoothies, your heart would have stopped before sunrise." The room seemed to tilt. The confirmation was a physical blow. This wasn't a theory anymore. It wasn't suspicion. It was biology. It was chemistry. The son I taught to ride a bike, the son I held and comforted when his heart was broken, had spent the last 6 months systematically feeding me rat poison and cardiac arrest agents. Elias asked if I wanted him to call the police. He reached for the phone on his desk. I stopped him, placing my hand over his. "No police," I said. "Not yet." Elias looked at me like I was insane. He said, "This is attempted murder, Arthur. They are actively trying to end your life." I stood up. The weakness was still there, but something else was rising to the surface. It was a cold, hard determination I hadn't felt in years. It was the exact feeling I had when the dot-com bubble burst in 2001. The feeling of chaos. The feeling of opportunity. I told him that if we called the police now, they would be arrested. They would hire the best defense lawyers, and they would get out on bail. A drawn-out trial would drag on for years, and they would use my own money to pay for their defense. They might even beat the charges on a technicality. That corrupt Dr. Vince would testify that I was delusional and must have taken the wrong substances myself. No, that was too easy for them. That was too clean. I looked at the toxicology report in Elias's hand. That piece of paper was my weapon, and it was my shield. I asked Elias what the treatment was. I asked how to get this garbage out of my body. He told me I needed an aggressive round of chelation therapy. The heavy medication would bind to the metals and strip them from my system. The process would be incredibly painful. It would leave me exhausted. It would take weeks to completely clear my system. But he could start me on the oral regimen tonight. He warned me that the side effects would mimic a severe flu: nausea, extreme fatigue, and deep bone pain. I told him I didn't care about the pain. I cared about clarity. I asked if the brain fog would clear up. He said it would. Once the thallium levels dropped, my cognitive functions would return to normal. The confusion would vanish, and my edge would return. That was the only thing I needed to hear. I took the prescription. I paid him in cash. A thick stack of bills, more than enough to ensure his silence and cover the unauthorized lab fees. I told him to lock the file away. I told him that if anything happened to me, if I was found dead in a ditch or a hotel room, he had to deliver that file straight to the FBI immediately. But until then, I was a ghost. Walking back out to my car, the night air felt completely different. It was cold, sharp, and real. The fog in my head hadn't fully cleared yet, but the fog in my soul was completely gone. I was no longer a confused old man. I was no longer a burden. I was a man who had just survived a 6-month assassination plot by his own flesh and blood. I sat in the driver's seat of the Porsche, staring at the small bottle Elias had handed me, the antidote. My son thought he was playing a long game. He thought he was brilliant. He thought he could slowly erase me from the world, turning me into a shaking, forgetful shell, and then discard me like garbage. He didn't realize that by poisoning my body, he had completely immunized me against the last shred of affection I had left for him. I didn't bother with water. I just dry swallowed the first pill. It tasted bitter, like chalk and rust. I started the engine, and the powerful roar of the machine was a comfort. I wasn't going back to the Austin estate. I wasn't going to the police station. I was going to war. I pulled out of the driveway, the tires crunching loudly on the gravel. I had a lot of work to do. I needed to freeze assets. I needed to rewrite wills, and I needed to set a trap. A trap so precise, so completely devastating, that by the time Julian and Chloe realized they were caught, the walls would have already closed in and crushed them. Dr. Vince said I had Alzheimer's. He said I was forgetting who I was. He was wrong. I remember exactly who I am. I am Arthur Sterling, and I am about to remind everyone else. Rain hammered violently against the Porsche's windshield as I parked on an old maintenance trail a mile from the estate, hidden behind a dense cluster of oak trees. I couldn't risk the engine noise alerting them. I killed the lights and sat there in the dark for a moment. The woods were heavy with a dead silence, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the storm. My chest still ached with a dull, throbbing pressure, a reminder that the toxins were still moving through my veins. But that first dose of the chelation medication was already starting to kick in. My mind felt clearer than it had in months. The fog was burning away, revealing the jagged edges of the reality I now had to navigate. I had become a stranger in my own life, an intruder slipping into the very fortress I built to protect the people who were now trying to kill me. I stepped out into the pouring rain, pulling up the collar of my trench coat. The icy water hitting my face felt good. It felt like a baptism. Trudging through the mud, I navigated the edge of the estate entirely by memory. I didn't head toward the main gates or the staff entrance. Instead, I made a straight line for an old stone gazebo at the far edge of the property. It was an ornamental ruin, looking like nothing more than a piece of landscaping to the untrained eye. But to me, it was the entrance to a Cold War relic. When I bought this land in the 80s, the previous owner was a paranoid oil tycoon convinced the Soviets were going to invade. He had built a reinforced underground tunnel connecting the garden gazebo to a hidden panic room right behind the library in the main house. I'd never used it. I used to laugh about it. But I had always maintained it, keeping the hinges oiled and the keypad active. I just never imagined that the enemy I would need to hide from would be sleeping in my own guest room. I brushed aside the wet ivy covering the stone slab and entered the code. It was my late wife's birthday. The keypad let out a soft beep that felt deafening in the dead of night, and the heavy trapdoor unlatched with a dull click. The air inside was stale, smelling of damp earth and old concrete. I clicked on a penlight, its narrow beam cutting through the darkness. The tunnel was tight, forcing me to hunch my shoulders. Every step was a battle. The poison made my legs feel weak, and my heart was hammering against my ribs, not from the exertion, but from a terrifying sense of anticipation. I was walking toward the truth, and I knew it was going to destroy whatever warmth I had left inside me. It took me 10 minutes to reach the steel door at the end of the tunnel. This was the entrance to the panic room. I punched in the code again. The hydraulic seals hissed, and the door popped open. I slipped inside and locked it behind me. The panic room was exactly as I had left it years ago. A small, windowless concrete bunker packed with non-perishable food, filtered water, and the high-tech security mainframe I had upgraded just last year. The room was freezing, the air conditioning cycling stale, chilled air through the vents. I sat down in the lone ergonomic chair in front of a massive bank of monitors. My hands hovered over the console. This room shared a wall with my private study. Hidden behind the bookshelves in that study was a massive piece of one-way glass, and if I slid the panel open, I could look directly into the room. But first, I pulled up the cameras. The screens flickered to life, bathing my face in a pale blue glow. I saw the kitchen, dark and empty. I saw the hallways, and then I saw the study. They were still in there. Seeing them on a phone screen in my car was one thing, but watching them now in high definition, just inches away behind a wall, felt like a physical violation. The very room where I had signed $100 million deals, the room where I used to read bedtime stories to Julian when he was a boy, had been turned into a command center targeting my life. Julian was sitting at my desk, my desk. He was hunched over a stack of papers, a pen tight in his hand. He wasn't reading, he was writing, over and over again. I zoomed the camera in. His movements were repetitive, paranoid. He was practicing my signature. I watched my son, the boy I sent to the best private schools, the man whose business failures and gambling debts I wiped clean time after time, painstakingly trying to replicate the loop of the A in Arthur. He would write one, compare it to a handwritten letter of mine pinned to the desk, and curse under his breath. "No," he muttered, his voice coming through the speakers with absolute clarity. "The tale is too long. The trust bank will flag it." Chloe was standing by the fireplace. The fire was roaring, eating up the oxygen in the room. She was holding a thick binder. I recognized the blue spine instantly. It was my old life insurance policy, the one that named the Texas Star Children's Shelter as the primary beneficiary. "You're overthinking it, Julian," she drawled, her voice thick with impatience. "He's an old man with a massive tremor. If the signature looks a little shaky, they'll just think he was having a bad day, or that the Parkinson's is affecting his motor skills. That's the beauty of the medical history we've put together." She tore a handful of pages out of the binder and tossed them straight into the fire. I watched the paper curl and turn black, the flames consuming the words meant to save sick children. She wasn't just stealing my money. She was stealing hope from innocent people. She was burning my legacy to feed her greed. Julian slammed the pen onto the desk. "I need this power of attorney to look flawless, Chloe. If we're going to use this to drain the liquid investment funds before probate freezes the accounts, it has to be perfect. If even one teller gets suspicious, we're done." Chloe walked up behind him, rubbing his shoulders. She leaned down, whispering right into his ear. "Nobody is going to get suspicious, babe. Dr. Vince already logged the hand tremors into his chart. We have a medical paper trail. We're just playing the part of the dutiful children taking over for an incompetent father. It's airtight." I felt a wave of intense nausea that had nothing to do with the thallium. They had weaponized my trust. Every time I complained about my hands shaking or my memory slipping, they weren't comforting me. They were taking notes. They were building a case file for my incompetence. Julian picked the pen back up. He stared at the paper. "How much longer do you think he has?" Chloe glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner, the one passed down to me by my father. She shrugged. "He took a massive dose this morning, plus the strain of driving to the airport. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. But he definitely won't survive the weekend. We need to have these transfer documents ready by Friday morning." I sat in the dark panic room, my fists clenched so hard my fingernails cut into my palms. I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating rage. I looked at Julian's face. He didn't look guilty. He didn't look conflicted. He just looked annoyed by the tedious work of forging a signature. He looked like a brat trying to finish his chores so he could go play. I reached out, touching the glass of the monitor. I remembered teaching him how to write. I remembered his chubby little hand holding a crayon, his tongue sticking out in pure concentration as he wrote his name for the very first time. I framed that piece of paper. It was still in a box in the attic, and now he was using that same hand to sign my death warrant. Finally, he traced a signature he was happy with. He held it up to the light. "There," he said, a smile spreading across his face. "That is Arthur Sterling." Chloe kissed him. "That is $1 billion, she corrected. I leaned back in my chair, the darkness of the panic room wrapping around me like a shroud. I had seen enough. I didn't need to hear another word. I had their motive. I had their method. I had their timeline. They gave me 3 days to live. I looked down at the control panel. I could record this video. I could send it to the Austin PD right now. They would be in handcuffs within the hour. But as I watched Chloe pour herself another glass of my Romani Conti, kick off her shoes, and prop her feet up on my desk, I realized that prison was far too good for them. Prison offers a regular routine, 3 meals a day, and the chance for parole. No, I don't want them in a cell. I want them in a prison of their own making. I want them to experience the absolute ecstasy of victory, and then I will personally pull the floor right out from under their feet. I want them to sign those documents. I want them to commit the unforgivable crime. I want them to walk into the bank with their heads held high, while the ink on their federal indictments slowly dries. I pulled a small notebook from my pocket. My hands were steady as I logged my observations, the time, the date, the specific documents destroyed, the exact admissions of guilt. This wasn't a journal. It was a formal record of evidence. I stood up. My legs felt strong now. Anger is a powerful fuel. I took one last look at the monitor. Julian was laughing at a joke Chloe made. They looked like a happy couple. They looked like the bright future of the Sterling Empire. I shut off the monitors, letting the room fall back into darkness. I didn't need to see any more. I knew exactly who they were. They were just children playing with matches in a house full of dynamite, and they had absolutely no idea that I was the one holding the detonator. I unlocked the panic room door. It was time to leave. I had to get back to the city. I had to meet Eleanor. We had a trap to build. As I walked back through the damp, narrow tunnel, leaving my warm home behind, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt like I was hunting. They thought the old lion was dying in his cave. They would soon find out the lion was just waiting for the hyenas to get close enough to snap their necks. With the Porsche's tires hissing against the wet asphalt, I merged onto Interstate 35, driving north toward Dallas. I was leaving the scene of the crime, but the crime followed me right into the car. My phone vibrated on the passenger seat, a call coming through that made my stomach turn. The screen lit up with a photo of my son, taken 10 years ago at his college graduation. He looked so innocent back then, wearing his cap and gown, smiling with his arm around my shoulder. I stared at the face of the boy I raised, contrasting it with the face of the man currently trying to stop my heart. I knew I had to answer. If I didn't, he would worry the poison was working too fast, or worse, that I was onto them. Silence breeds suspicion, and I needed him to feel safe. I needed him to think everything was going perfectly according to his twisted plan. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders drop, forcing my body to assume the posture of a tired, confused old man. I cleared the sharpness from my throat and pressed answer on the third ring. "Hello, Julian," I said. I purposely let my voice tremble, adding a layer of weakness that hadn't been there before. "Is that you, son?" "Hey, Dad." His voice filled the car speakers, bright and cheerful. It was a performance, that overly sweet tone he only used when he wanted money or forgiveness. "We just got to the resort in Sedona. You wouldn't believe how beautiful the red rocks are. Chloe can't wait to hit the spa." I gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather groaned. He lied with the smooth, practiced ease of a sociopath. I had just watched him sit in my Austin study drinking my wine. He wasn't in Arizona. He was miles behind me, forging my name. He was likely using an ambient sound app to play breezes and birds in the background. I listened closely, and sure enough, I caught the faint loop of white noise. "That sounds wonderful, son," I said, forcing a couple of dry coughs. "I'm glad you made it safely. I was worried about turbulence." "Don't worry about us, Dad." He brushed off my concern smoothly. "How are you feeling? Did you have your smoothie tonight?" Chloe was worried she made the blend a little too strong. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. He was checking on the lethal dosage. He wanted to know if the thallium was burning through my stomach lining yet. I paused for a long moment, letting the heavy silence stretch just enough to make him uncomfortable. Then I answered, "I did, Julian. It tasted bitter, but I finished the whole thing." "Good," he said, and I could hear the profound relief in his voice. "It's good for your heart, Dad. Dr. Vince said you need to stick to the routine. Make sure you finish the whole glass before bed. We want you nice and strong when we get back." "I will, son," I whispered. "I promise. I'll drink it down to the very last drop." I wasn't lying. I would drink every drop of the bitter cup he handed me, and then I was going to smash that glass over his head. "Get some rest, Dad. We'll call you tomorrow. Love you." "Love you too," I said. The line went dead. A low, guttural growl tore from my throat. That final phrase was the ultimate insult. It was a habit of speech, a reflex. I tossed the phone back onto the seat. I was approaching downtown Dallas. The massive glass skyscrapers rose before me, a canyon of steel and ambition. This was my arena. This was where I carved out my kingdom. At the estate in Austin, I was Arthur Sterling, the retired old man, the target. But in this concrete jungle, I was the predator. I drove straight to the Rosewood Mansion in Dallas. I didn't use the main entrance. I used the private residential side entry, a privilege I kept from when I owned several floors of the building back in the 90s. I had already called ahead, booking the penthouse under a dormant LLC. As the elevator rode up to the top floor, I dialed Eleanor Carter. Eleanor is the kind of ruthless attorney who gives other lawyers nightmares. We went back 30 years. At 65, she was still in the trenches, sharp as a razor. She didn't have clients. She had co-conspirators. "Eleanor," I said when she answered, "I'm in the penthouse at the Rosewood. Bring the red files and bring a forensic accountant you would trust with your life." "Arthur, it's 10 o'clock at night," Eleanor grumbled. "This better be monumental." "It's not good, Eleanor. It's a murder investigation, and I'm the victim." That got her attention instantly. 45 minutes later, she was standing at my door. Eleanor walked in, took one look at me, and frowned. "You look like you just crawled out of the trenches, Arthur." "I feel like it too," I admitted, pouring her a bourbon while sticking to plain water for myself. "My own son is poisoning me, Eleanor. Thallium and digitalis. I have the toxicology report from Dr. Ayres. I also have security footage of them in my study right now, forging my signature to drain the trusts." Eleanor slowly sat down, the color draining from her face. She read the report. She watched the footage clips on my laptop. When she looked up, the woman complaining about the late hour was gone. The Texas rattlesnake had bared her fangs. "We contact the district attorney immediately," Eleanor said, her voice low and dangerous. "We can have them in handcuffs tonight. Attempted murder, wire fraud, elder abuse. I can have it done before sunrise." "No," I cut her off. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the Dallas skyline. Arresting them is too easy. They have money, my money, to hire a dream team of high-priced lawyers. They'll plead down, claim coercion, or muddy the waters. They'll drag my name through the mud for years. Even if they end up in prison, they'll sit in their cells feeling like they almost won. "Then what do you want, Arthur?" Eleanor asked softly. I turned to face her. "I want to activate the Icarus Protocol." Eleanor's eyes widened. She hadn't heard me use that term since a hostile takeover of a Silicon Valley hardware giant back in 1998. The Icarus Protocol was the nuclear option. It wasn't just a defense. It was the total, systematic annihilation of an opponent's financial reality. "You want to bankrupt your own son?" Eleanor whispered. "I want to erase him," I said. "I want him to wake up and realize that every single asset he thinks he owns is a mirage. I want him to sign those documents he's forging right now. I want those documents to be the trapdoor that drops him straight into bankruptcy." I sat across from Eleanor and laid out my plan. It was highly precise. It relied entirely on the fact that while Julian and Chloe were greedy, they were incredibly lazy and arrogant. They understood money, but they didn't understand the complex plumbing of the financial system. First, I instructed Eleanor to quietly contact the private banking division managing the trusts. We weren't going to freeze the accounts. Freezing the accounts would alert them the moment a transfer failed. Instead, we were going to implement a shadow mirror. We would create a cloned, identical interface for my online banking. When Julian logged in using the stolen credentials, he would see the exact balance he expected. He would see the $1 billion. He could execute trades and initiate transfers, but it would all be a simulation, a sandbox environment. "The real money," I explained to Eleanor, "moves tonight. Transfer all liquid assets into the irrevocable charitable trust we set up for the Texas Children's Hospital. But leave the credentials to that flagged crypto cold wallet completely exposed." "The honeypot wallet?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Are you out of your mind?" "Not at all. Years ago, while consulting for the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice on transnational money laundering operations, I helped them set up a node wallet designed to look like a dark web exchange fund pool. The account was still active, but it carried the highest level red flag across every federal investigative database. Any movement of funds into or out of that account would instantly trigger a priority, one anti-money laundering alert with the FBI and the Department of the Treasury. It was a direct trapdoor to a federal corrections facility. "I'll leave the recovery phrase for that cold wallet right where Chloe can find it," I said. "They'll think it's a hidden stash of my secret wealth, untaxed money, or some off-the-books asset. With the current hype in the crypto market, they won't be able to resist. They'll try to launder it out. And the second they do—" Eleanor finished my thought, a cold, calculating smile appearing on her face. They aren't just stealing from you anymore. They're committing federal wire fraud, international money laundering, and triggering a RICO violation. They'll be stepping directly onto a landmine buried by the U.S. Department of Justice. Exactly. I want them facing federal charges. No parole, no plea deals, just 20 years in a maximum security federal prison. Eleanor opened her laptop and cracked her knuckles. I hope you know what you're doing, Arthur. Once I execute the Icarus Protocol, there is no turning back. That transfer to the hospital's charitable trust is completely irrevocable. You are effectively draining your own wealth to finish your son. I looked over at the screen where the live feed of the study was still playing. Julian was pouring himself another glass of my Romani Conti. My wealth was already gone, Eleanor, I said. It died the exact moment my son decided my life was worth less than a super yacht. If I have to burn down the entire castle just to take out the rats in the walls, then hand me the matches. Eleanor nodded. Her fingers began to fly across the keyboard. For the next 4 hours, we worked in absolute silence. We completely rewrote the legal architecture of my entire life. We transferred real estate deeds into holding companies owned by charities. We changed beneficiary designations on life insurance policies. We stripped Julian Sterling of every single penny he ever expected to inherit. By 3 in the morning, everything was set. Technically and legally, I was broke. My billions were now the legal property of the Children's Cancer Ward in Texas. It was effective immediately, even if the public transfer logs would take 48 hours to register in the system. Eleanor closed her laptop. It's done. The trap is set. Now we just wait for them to take the bait. I stood up, finally feeling the exhaustion hit me like a tidal wave. The chelation medication was making my joints ache fiercely, but my mind was incredibly sharp. They'll bite, I said. Greed is a highly predictable beast. It always eats until it chokes. Eleanor packed up her things to leave. She paused at the door. You should try to get some sleep, Arthur. You have a massive performance to give tomorrow. Yeah, I said. What part are you playing? She asked. I smiled, a cold, humorless expression. The victim. After Eleanor left, I lay back on the stiff hotel sheets. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, rehearsing my lines over and over in my head. Tomorrow, I had to sound even weaker. I had to sound like a man on his last breath. I had to make Julian believe his timeline was accelerating. I needed him to panic, because when people panic, they make mistakes. And when they make mistakes, they leave fingerprints. I picked up the burner phone and checked the text from Jorge one last time. Secure! I was safe. But Julian and Chloe, they were standing right in the crosshairs of a sniper rifle they didn't even know was aimed at them. I closed my eyes and waited for the sun to rise. The Icarus Protocol was live. The hunt was officially on. The morning light over Dallas was cold and gray, cutting through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite. I stood there holding a cup of black coffee, watching the city slowly wake up. They had no idea that from 39 stories up, I was launching a full-scale war. My body was screaming for rest. The chelation medication was stripping the thallium from my bloodstream, but the physical toll was brutal. My joints felt like they were filled with crushed glass, and a steady pounding headache throbbed at the base of my skull. But I couldn't sleep, not yet. I still had to place the final, most devastating piece of the trap. Eleanor and I had built the cage, but a cage without bait is useless. We had moved the legal assets into the charitable trust, shielding them from Julian's grasp, but simply preventing him from getting the money wasn't enough. If he went to the bank on Monday and found the accounts completely empty, he would be furious. He would scream, threaten lawsuits, and challenge the validity of the trust in probate court, dragging my name through courtrooms for years. He would play the victim, claiming his dementia-ridden father was manipulated by opportunistic lawyers. He might walk away with a massive settlement just to make him go away. No, that was an outcome I absolutely refused to accept. I needed him to cross an irreversible red line. I needed him to commit an act so egregious, so undeniably criminal, that any jury in the world would look at him with nothing but pure disgust. I needed him to steal money that the federal government was actively watching. I turned and walked over to the sleek glass desk in the living room, opening my laptop. The screen lit up with the familiar interface of my primary email account. This was the key. I knew my son better than he knew himself. I knew he was lazy, and I knew he was arrogant. But above all else, I knew he was deeply paranoid. He believed everyone was keeping secrets from him, because he spent his whole life keeping secrets from everyone else. For the past 6 months, he had been searching for my secret stash, convinced I had an offshore account or a hidden vault he didn't know about. Today I was going to prove him right. I had left an older iPad back at the estate in the library. It sat on the side table right next to my reading chair, exactly where I always kept it. I knew Chloe had been snooping through it. Weeks ago I saw her through the hidden cameras, leaving fingerprints all over the screen, monitoring my emails and my search history, looking for evidence of my cognitive decline. Today she was going to discover something else. I clicked New Message. My heart rate began to pick up. This email had to be absolutely flawless. The tone had to be perfectly calibrated. It couldn't look like a trap. It had to look like a slip-up. A critical error made by an old man slowly losing his grip. I typed in the recipient's name, Jean-Luc Vasseur. The man didn't exist, of course, but the email address looked incredibly official, tied to a defunct Swiss banking domain I purchased years ago for a corporate counter-espionage operation. Subject: came in liquidation, urgent. I began to type the body of the email, writing slowly, intentionally mimicking the voice of a fearful old man keeping a massive secret. Jean-Luc, I wrote, I need to immediately transfer the funds from the Flag Cold Wallet. The $150 million is no longer safe there. My health is deteriorating faster than I anticipated. If something happens to me, I do not want this digital asset passing through the U.S. probate courts. The taxes will be devastating. Furthermore, I absolutely cannot allow my son access to this unmonitored capital. He lacks the maturity and will ruin it. Please prepare the transfer routing to the Panama Shell Company. I will send the final authorization key tomorrow. I read it over. $150 million. The number was large enough to completely blind them. It was enough money to buy private islands, yachts, and political influence. That scale of wealth makes a person's brain shut down entirely, leaving nothing but pure survival instinct. I didn't click send. Sending it would create an unchangeable record. Instead, I saved it directly to the drafts folder. The brilliant thing about modern technology is cloud synchronization. The exact millisecond I saved that draft on my laptop in Dallas, it instantly synced to the iPad sitting on the side table in the Austin library. It was a digital landmine, fully armed, sitting quietly and waiting for someone to step on it. Now all I had to do was wait. I pulled up the security feed on my large monitor. The house was dead quiet. It was early, just after 7 in the morning. Julian and Chloe were likely still fast asleep in the master bedroom, my bedroom, dreaming of the billionaire lifestyle they thought was already within their grasp. I forced myself to drink some water and swallowed another collation pill. A wave of nausea hit me hard, but I fought it down. I had to stay sharp. An hour passed, then 2. The sun rose higher in the sky. I watched Jorge walk down the hallway, adjusting a rug in the foyer. My chest tightened. If someone moved the iPad or turned it off, the plan could fall apart. But Jorge was incredibly disciplined. He never touched my personal electronics. He was a good man. I made a mental note to not only pay off his daughter's tuition in full, but also to set up a massive retirement trust for him when this was over. At 9:30, the library door finally opened. Chloe walked in. She was wearing a silken leather robe that belonged to my late wife. Seeing her in it made my jaw tighten instantly. She looked like she thought she was the rightful queen of the castle, walking with an arrogant stride that turned my stomach. She carried a cup of coffee and walked over to the window, staring out at the rain-soaked Texas hills. Then she turned around and saw the iPad. I leaned closer to the monitor. This was the moment. She picked it up. She didn't open it immediately. She glanced toward the door, ensuring she was completely alone, and then she pressed the home button. She knew my passcode. Of course she did. I had likely given it to Julian years ago for emergencies, and she had pried it out of him. She opened the email app. I could see the reflection of the screen in the mirror, right behind her. She refreshed the inbox. Nothing interesting, just junk mail and business newsletters. She was about to set it down. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. Don't put it down. Look deeper. Then her finger froze. She tapped on the drafts folder. I watched her entire posture shift instantly. Her spine stiffened, freezing her completely in place. She was reading. I could almost hear her thoughts echoing through the room. 150 million? Not safe. Son is immature. Her eyes widened into dinner plates. She read it once, twice, and then a third time. She looked around the room frantically, as if expecting that money to materialize out of thin air. She slammed her coffee mug onto the antique desk, bypassing the coaster entirely and leaving a nasty ring on the wood. She couldn't have cared less. She turned and sprinted out of the room like a madwoman. I switched the camera feed to the hallway, then to the master bedroom. Julian was still in bed, scrolling mindlessly through his phone. Chloe burst through the door, brandishing the iPad like a weapon. "Julian!" she screamed. "Get up! You need to look at this right now!" Julian sat up with a jolt. "What's wrong? Is he dead? Did the hospital call?" "No, you idiot. Look at this. He's been keeping secrets from us. He's been lying to us for years." She shoved the iPad into his face. Julian rubbed the sleep from his eyes and grabbed the device. He read the draft email. I watched his face transform instantly. The confusion turned into absolute shock, and then inevitably into that vicious glare I've seen in hungry wolves, right before they tear into their prey. 150 million? Julian whispered, his voice trembling. He has $150 million hidden in a cold wallet? Why didn't he tell me? "Because he thinks you're a failure, Julian," Chloe shouted, pacing the room. "Look at the email. Lacks maturity. Unmonitored capital. He's planning to transfer it to Panama. He's going to hide it from us forever." Julian got out of bed, joining her pacing. The greed had completely taken over, overriding any shred of logic or caution left in his brain. 150 million. Do you know what we could do with that? We'd never have to beg him for an allowance again. We could buy half of Silicon Valley. We have to get it. "We have to take it," Chloe hissed. "We have to get it before he sends that email. If it goes to Panama, it's completely gone. We'll never find it." "But how?" Julian asked, staring at the device. "It says he needs an authorization key. We don't have the keys or the recovery phrase." "Use your brain, Julian." Chloe grabbed his shoulders, shaking him violently. "Where does your dad keep his old confidential files?" "The vintage server cabinet, in the hidden compartment behind the wine rack in his office." Julian's eyes lit up. "Last Christmas, when he thought I wasn't looking, I saw him messing with it. He said it was just obsolete hardware. I bet you anything the recovery phrase for that cold wallet is in there." I smiled in my empty penthouse suite in Dallas. Chloe was smarter than Julian, but that also made her completely predictable. She saw me messing with that cabinet because I intentionally wanted her to see it. It was a seed I planted 6 months ago. There was no obsolete hardware in that cabinet, only a notebook with a phrase written inside. The trap had layers upon layers. "Go check the cabinet," Chloe ordered, "right now." Julian didn't argue. He ran out of the room in his boxer shorts. I switched the feed back to the study. Julian burst in, threw the wine rack aside, and frantically turned the combination lock on the hidden compartment. He knew the code, 198804, the month and year of his birth. I had intentionally set it to something simple, a sentimental choice that now felt like a cruel joke. The hidden door popped open. He pulled out a small notebook bound in black leather. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it on the floor. He flipped through the pages like a lunatic. There it was, on the very last page. A 24-word Bitcoin and Ethereum recovery phrase with the heading AS Blackbox. "I found it!" he yelled. "Chloe, I found it!" Chloe ran in, completely out of breath. "Log in. Do it now. Use his laptop. That iPad is too slow." Julian sat down at my desk and opened my MacBook. He expertly downloaded a crypto wallet extension and typed in the 24 words from the notebook. The screen began to load. I knew exactly what would display on that screen. It would show a fabricated front-end interface reflecting a balance of $150 million in crypto assets. "Oh my God," Julian gasped, the air leaving his lungs. "It's real. It's actually real." Chloe leaned over his shoulder. the blue light of the screen reflecting in her eyes. Her face was contorted with pure, unadulterated greed. Transfer it, all of it. Where to? Julian asked. To that mixer address we set up through the shell company in the Bahamas, she said. The one we use for laundering. It's completely untraceable. Do it quickly, Julian, before the old man wakes up and deletes the draft. Julian hesitated for a fraction of a second, his finger hovering over the enter key. This is major wire fraud, Chloe. If we get caught... Chloe slapped the back of his head hard. Who is going to catch us? The old man is on his deathbed. By the time anyone realizes this money is missing, he'll be buried in the ground, and we'll be sipping cocktails on a beach with no extradition treaty. Do you want to be a billionaire, or do you want to be a coward living on handouts? Julian looked at the screen. He looked at the number. 150 million. He made his choice. I'm doing it, he said, and began typing in the transfer details. I leaned back in my chair in Dallas. The mousetrap snapped shut. They hadn't just swallowed the bait. They took the hook, the line, and the entire fishing rod with it. By accessing that account, by using those keys, and by transferring federal bait money to an offshore address, they had just lit up the red alert boards at the FBI, the IRS, and the Department of Justice, all at the same time. I picked up my burner phone and sent a short text to Eleanor. Done. They're in. I watched Julian slam his finger onto the confirm key. The screen flashed a confirmation message. Transaction broadcast to the blockchain network. They cheered. They actually jumped up and down in my study, hugging each other tight like two kids who had just won a game. They were celebrating their own total destruction. I felt a profound sadness wash over me, a final moment of mourning for the son I lost a long time ago. But as I watched them pop open another bottle of my vintage wine to celebrate their successful theft, that sadness instantly hardened into iron determination. Enjoy that champagne, I whispered to the screen, because this hangover is going to be a life sentence. I closed the laptop. The fish was on the hook. Now it was time to prepare the final execution. I needed to get ready for my return from the dead. I stood up, walked over to the closet, and pulled out my custom tuxedo. I smoothed down the lapels. Tonight, I wouldn't be wearing a hospital gown. I would be wearing my armor. I was going to walk into that house, not as a victim, but as the judge, the jury, and the executioner of their false reality. The air inside the penthouse suite felt heavy, the silence broken only by the hum of the server fans and the strong, steady beat of my own heart. On the high-definition monitor in front of me, I watched the two rats scramble inside the maze I had custom-built for them. Julian and Chloe were huddled around my laptop in the study, hovering over it like vultures tearing into a fresh carcass. The light from the screen illuminated their faces, twisting them into expressions of frantic panic. 他们有了钱包地址，他们有了黑皮书里的主题词，但他们装上了一堵枪. I zoomed the camera in. The fake front end of that offshore exchange, a phishing node I had helped the FBI Cybercrime Division build years ago, was demanding a secondary verification password. It was just a blank white box with a blinking cursor, but to them it was an iron gate standing between them and $150 million. Julian was sweating. I could see the reflection of the light on his forehead. He was frantically typing in combinations, slamming the enter key and cursing loudly every time the red invalid credentials text flashed across the screen. He tried my birthday. He tried his birthday. He tried the street number of our very first house. He tried Chloe's name. Stop guessing, you idiot, Chloe hissed, her voice sounding distorted through the security speakers. You're going to lock the account. If you trigger a security lockout, we won't be able to get in without his biometric data. We need the password. Think, Julian. What would he use? I leaned back in my chair, taking a slow sip of pure water. The chelation medication was doing its job, stripping the heavy metals from my blood, but the process felt like it was draining my very marrow. My bones literally vibrated with a deep, systemic ache. But this physical agony was highly useful. I needed to sound weak. I needed to sound like a man on the brink of losing his grip on reality. I knew exactly what their next move would be. Julian pulled out his phone. He opened the spyware app he had secretly installed on my phone 3 months ago. He thought he was being incredibly clever, hiding the malicious tracking code inside that high-precision weather app he had insisted I download. He had been listening to my calls, tracking my GPS, and reading my messages. That was how they knew every time I went to meet my lawyer or visited the private bank. I had left that back door open on purpose. I didn't uninstall the spyware. I kept it for this exact moment. I needed a direct line straight into their ears, a pipeline where I could feed them false intelligence that they would accept as absolute truth, simply because they believed they had stolen it from me. I picked up my burner phone and dialed my own primary number, knowing the spyware would log and record the call immediately. To Julian, it would look like a desperate, highly confidential voicemail left for my attorney. I cleared my throat, forcing a raspy, ragged edge into my voice. I slouched in my chair to compress my diaphragm, making my breathing sound shallow and exhausted. I hit dial. On the monitor, I saw Julian's head snap up. He raised a hand to silence Chloe, quickly tapping his phone screen. He was listening to me in real time. Eleanor, pick up. It's Arthur, I began, my voice trembling perfectly. I paused, letting a long, labored gasp escape my lips. I'm at the hotel. The pressure in my chest is getting worse, Eleanor. I don't think the treatment is working. I feel like I'm drowning. I looked closely at Julian on the screen. A massive grin spread across his face. He gave Chloe a major thumbs up, visibly thrilled by the idea that I was fading fast. Listen to me, Eleanor, I continued, injecting a manic, desperate urgency into my tone. We can't wait until Monday. That flagged cold wallet, the $150 million. We have to move it now. If I don't make it through the night, if my heart fails, the regulators will freeze it. Or worse, Julian will find it. He isn't ready for that responsibility, Eleanor. He'll blow through it in a week on failed projects and luxury cars. He doesn't understand what it takes. On the monitor, Chloe's face hardened. She silently mouthed a vicious insult at the screen. I need you to log into the node for me, I panted, dropping my voice to a rough whisper. I can't do it. My hands are shaking too badly to type. The credentials are in the black notebook. You have a copy. But the secondary key, I changed it last month. I changed it to the only date that still means anything to me. Julian leaned in closer to his phone, practically vibrating with excitement. This was it, the master key to the kingdom. It's the day she left me, Eleanor, I said, letting a genuine tear slip down my cheek. In this entire script of lies, the memory of that date was the only thing that was real. October 12th, 1998, the day Elizabeth passed away. The day the light went out in my life. That's the password. 10121998. No spaces, just the numbers. Use it, Eleanor. Move the assets to the Panama account. Do it now. I hung up the phone. I sat in the penthouse suite, my hands shaking slightly. That date was sacred. It was the day my wife, Julian's mother, lost her fight with cancer. The day I held her hand, watched her take her last breath, and promised her I would always protect our son. Using that date as the trap's password felt like a profound sacrifice, but it was necessary. It was the ultimate test. If Julian had a single shred of humanity left in him, hearing that date and his father's broken voice should have made him pause. He should have hesitated, felt a wave of memory, or experienced a sting of guilt. I stared at the screen. Julian didn't hesitate for a second. He didn't look sad, and he didn't lower his head. He didn't even acknowledge that I was talking about his own mother's death. He just looked up at Chloe and shouted, I got it! It's my mom's death anniversary. 10121998. Chloe clapped her hands, urging him on. Type it in, hurry! I watched my son punch in those numbers. 10121998. He struck the keys hard, filled with absolute euphoria. He was using the anniversary of his mother's death to steal his father's life's work. The sheer irony was razor sharp, cutting deep into my gut. He stripped that date of all its tragedy, reducing it to a mere passcode to unlock a vault. He hit enter. The mirrored interface on my laptop spun for a second, then flashed a brilliant green. Access authorized. We're in! Julian screamed, leaping out of his chair and punching the air. We're in, babe! Look at that balance! Chloe shoved him aside, staring hungrily at the screen. $150 million. It's beautiful. They hugged tightly, dancing around my study to celebrate. They were so blinded by the astronomical numbers on the screen that they completely missed the digital click of the trap locking into place in the background. By logging in with those credentials, they had officially crossed the Rubicon. They had accessed a decoy account specifically built for federal anti-money laundering enforcement. Their IP address, their device MAC codes, their physical location, and a timestamp precise down to the millisecond were now being logged on Department of Justice servers in Washington, D.C. They hadn't just attempted a theft. They had committed wire fraud, unauthorized access to a protected federal financial system, and conspiracy to launder funds. I watched them high-five. Julian grabbed the bottle of Romani Conti, chugging a massive gulp straight from the neck. "We did it," he said, wiping wine from his chin. "The old man is crying to his lawyer in a hotel room, and we just took everything." "Initiate the transfer," Chloe ordered. "Move it to the Bahamas account." Julian sat back down, cracking his knuckles. "Goodbye, Dad. Thanks for the inheritance." He began typing the transfer routing commands. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. The sadness I felt earlier was entirely gone, burned away by the acid of their total indifference. They had proven, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that they were beyond saving. They were dancing on my grave before I was even in it, trampling Elizabeth's memory for cash. I opened my eyes, taking one last look at the monitor. "Go ahead, son," I whispered to the screen. "Press the button." Julian clicked the transfer button. The screen updated. "Transaction processing." They cheered again. I picked up my phone and sent a short text to Eleanor. "The Eagle has landed. They executed the transfer." Eleanor replied instantly. "The FBI has the logs. A federal judge is signing the warrants now. Do you want to step in?" I looked at the image of my son and his wife laughing on the screen, drunk on stolen wine in an illusion of victory. "No," I texted back. "Let them finish the bottle. I want them to experience a hangover they will feel for the next 20 years. I stood up and walked to the window. The city below was brilliant with lights. The game was over. They had already lost. They just didn't know it yet. For the next 48 hours, they would live in a fantasy world, believing they were wealthy, powerful, and free. They would look at properties, maybe book flights, and build dreams. I would let them dream, because when you think you're flying, the fall is always much harder. I touched the cold glass of the window. "Happy anniversary, Elizabeth," I whispered to the empty room. I kept my promise. I protected him. I protected him from the monster he was becoming. And right now, the only way to save him is to stop him. I turned off the lights in the penthouse suite, leaving only the pale blue glow of the monitoring station. The rats had taken the cheese. Now all that was left to do was recover the remains. The atmosphere in the penthouse shifted completely. It was no longer a refuge for a grieving father or a war room for a vengeful businessman. It had become a highly precise surgical suite. The lights were dimmed, and the row of high-definition monitors mounted against the wall cast long, deep blue shadows across the room. I sat right in the center, flanked by Eleanor Carter on my right, and a man whose formidable reputation I knew well but was only meeting tonight, Special Agent Miller from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Miller looked like he was carved out of solid granite, a man of few words and intense observation. His eyes were locked onto the screens, watching my son systematically dismantle his own life. There was no alcohol in the suite, no background music, just the low hum of the server racks Miller's team had installed to ensure a secure, zero-latency link to the federal enforcement servers. We were watching a crime take place in real time, but unlike any standard heist, we had willingly handed the keys, the maps, and the vault codes straight to the thieves. On the primary screen, the feed from my study was crystal clear. Julian sat at my walnut desk, the glow from the laptop illuminating a face that looked completely manic. The alcohol had flushed his cheeks, and his movements were stiff with nervous energy. Chloe stood directly behind him, her hands gripping the back of the chair so tightly her nails practically sunk into the leather. She was the architect of this moment, whispering into his ear, driving him forward, completely blinded by $150 million that didn't actually exist. Agent Miller leaned forward, tapping a key on his own terminal. It was the first time he had spoken in an hour. His voice clipped and entirely professional. Mr. Sterling, we are live on the transaction server node. The connection is secure. We have a direct mirror mapping their keystrokes. Every input is being recorded by the cyber division in DC. The moment he hits confirm, the trap snaps shut. I nodded, unable to find my voice. My throat was completely tight. I was watching my son, the boy I taught to fish on Lake Travis, the boy I had bailed out of trouble countless times, get ready to commit a major federal offense. I wanted to scream at the monitor. I wanted to shatter the glass and shake him. I wanted to tell him to stop, to walk away, to just do the right thing for once in his life. But I stayed silent. I had to. The boy I loved was long gone. The man on that screen was a stranger, a parasite, a criminal who decided my existence was the only obstacle to his happiness. On the screen, Julian navigated the interface of the fake offshore bank. We intentionally designed it to look intimidating, filled with dense legal disclaimers and security warnings. A prominent red warning text flashed across the screen. It explicitly stated that unauthorized access to this account violated international banking laws and would result in criminal prosecution. This was his final chance, the absolute last moral stop sign. Julian didn't even glance at it. Without a single second of hesitation, he clicked, I accept. Chloe laughed, the sound coming through the speakers sharp like cracking glass. Look at that, she said. They still try to scare people with fine print. Just skip past it, babe. Let's get the money. Eleanor shifted next to me. She took off her glasses to wipe them, a nervous habit of hers I hadn't seen in years. He knows exactly what he's doing, Arthur, Eleanor whispered. Look at his face. No hesitation, no guilt. I watched. Eleanor was right. Julian wasn't conflicted. He was completely ecstatic. He typed in the routing numbers for the Bahamian shell company Chloe had set up. He verified the digits carefully, not out of fear, but with greedy precision. He wanted to make sure every single cent of that $150 million landed directly in his pocket. Agent Miller spoke again, narrating what we were seeing in strict legal terms. He's entered the routing number. That's the first charge. Conspiracy to launder monetary instruments. He's knowingly moving funds from a flagged account into a non-extradition jurisdiction. That's 5 years minimum on that count alone. Julian entered the amount. $150 million. He hit the keys hard, typing out the long string of zeros. Second charge, Miller said. Attempted grand larceny on a scale that pushes this into a special tier of federal sentencing guidelines. Then came the final step. The screen demanded the confirmation code, the failsafe I built into the fake site. It required biometric authentication or a backup override key. Julian didn't have my fingerprint, of course, but he had the black notebook. He grabbed the notebook from the desk, flipping through the pages frantically until he found the backup authentication key I had planted. He read the code aloud, his voice shaking with pure excitement. Alpha 7, Victor 9. He typed it in. The screen transitioned, displaying a simple, gray rectangular button that read, Execute Transfer. This was it, the point of no return. A dead silence fell over the penthouse. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. It felt like I was watching an execution, but I couldn't tell if it was the execution of my son or my own heart. Julian's finger hovered over the enter key. He looked up at Chloe. We're going to be free, he said, his eyes wide and shiny with tears of excitement. No more begging the old man for handouts. No more asking for permission. We're going to own the world. Chloe kissed the top of his head. Do it, she whispered. Press the button and bury him. I closed my eyes. The image of that button was burned into my eyelids. Do it, I whispered to myself. I heard a sharp, crisp click, the sound of plastic keys hitting the board, but as it echoed through the suite, it sounded exactly like a gunshot. I opened my eyes. On the monitor, the fake banking screen flashed a spinning loading icon showing processing. Meanwhile, in the suite, Agent Miller's laptop screen lit up with a sudden cascade of data. Streams of green and red code scrolled rapidly across his display. Target confirmed, Miller said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. The data packets have been received. Wire request logged at 10:42 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have the IP address. We have the device MAC address. We have a precise geographic lock on your estate in Austin. He turned to face me. Mr. Sterling, the crime is complete. By hitting that key, your son has just committed federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and because the account he attempted to access is technically federal property, used for an active operation, fraud against the United States government, Julian and Chloe had no idea. On their screen, the spinning wheel stopped, replaced by a massive green check mark. Transfer successful, funds clearing. The reaction inside the study was explosive. Julian bolted out of his chair so violently he almost knocked it over. He let out a loud primal scream, a wild animalistic shout of victory. Chloe shrieked and threw herself into his arms. They spun around the room, knocking over a stack of books, laughing hysterically. "We're rich!" Julian shouted. "We're completely rich!" Chloe grabbed the bottle of Romani Conti and took a massive swig straight from the neck, the red wine spilling down her chin and staining her white silk robe. "To Arthur Sterling!" she yelled, raising the bottle to toast the empty air in mocking tribute, "the generous benefactor of our new life. May he rest in peace, preferably by tomorrow morning." I watched them celebrate. They looked like they had just won the lottery. They hugged, they kissed, talking over each other as they started planning the future. Yachts in the Mediterranean, penthouses in Dubai. They were spending money they had just stolen, completely unaware that the only thing they had actually bought was a federal indictment. Eleanor placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Arthur. They're done. No lawyer on earth can get them out of this. We have the video, the data logs, and the criminal intent." I stared at the screen, looking at the man I used to hold as a baby. I remembered the day he was born and how I swore I would give him the world. I failed. I gave him too much, and it allowed him to rot from the inside out. Agent Miller closed his laptop. "I'll forward the evidence package to the U.S. Attorney's Office immediately. A judge will sign the arrest warrants within the hour. Mr. Sterling, we can move whenever you're ready." I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but steady. The nausea was gone. The confusion was gone. All that remained was a cold, absolute clarity in the aftermath. "Not yet," I said. "Let them enjoy tonight. Let them sleep with the dreams of kings. Let them wake up and pack their bags." I walked over to the window, looking out at the lights of Dallas. "I want the arrests made at the party," I said, turning back to Miller. "They're hosting a dinner this Saturday. A charity gala they're calling a celebration of my retirement. They've invited everyone, my business partners, the board members, all of their high society friends." Miller nodded slowly. "You want to break them in public?" "I want witnesses," I said. "I want everyone to see exactly who they are. I don't want rumors. I don't want speculation. I want the truth to be as bright and undeniable as a spotlight." Eleanor sighed. "That is going to be incredibly brutal, Arthur." "Betrayal is brutal, Eleanor," I replied. "Justice is simply balancing the scales." I took one last look at the monitor. Julian and Chloe had collapsed onto the sofa, completely exhausted from their celebration, with the laptop still glowing on the floor. They looked peaceful, almost innocent, but the digital footprint they just left behind would follow them for the rest of their lives. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The anger had burned itself out, leaving nothing but ash. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired. To save the body, I had to sever the infected limb. Agent Miller began packing away his gear. "We'll have teams in place on Saturday. The moment you give the signal, we move in." "Thank you, Agent," I said. As they left the room, leaving me alone in the pale blue glow of the monitors, I sat back down. I watched my son sleep. "Sleep well, Julian," I whispered. "Dream of your yachts and your Ferraris, because when you wake up, the only thing you'll own is the orange jumpsuit on your back." I shut off the monitors. The screens went dark, erasing them from my sight. But in the quiet darkness of the penthouse, I didn't feel alone. I could feel every decision I had ever made leading me precisely to this moment. The perfect crime had been committed, and the consequences were going to be even more flawless. In the world of the living, 3 days of total silence is a long time, but in the world of the guilty, it feels like relaxing in a warm, comforting bath. Julian and Chloe took my silence as final confirmation. They assumed the thallium and digitalis had completed their mission in that room at the Rosewood Mansion, stopping my heart for good. They expected a hotel housekeeper to discover my body sooner or later, or honestly, as long as that offshore wire transfer went through, they didn't care if I was found at all. And that wire transfer did indeed clear. In their eyes, $150 million was now sitting securely in their Bahamian account. It was a golden parachute large enough to carry them far away from any real consequences. They were so completely intoxicated by this illusion of victory that they decided to throw a massive party on my grave before the dirt was even settled over me. For the old money families around here, a Saturday night on a Lake Travis estate is usually a quiet affair. We value privacy. We appreciate discretion. But new money, especially stolen money, revels in a loud, obnoxious display, and I blasted right through the display screens of the black surveillance van parked a quarter-mile down my driveway. I watched my estate get turned into a circus. They had hired a lighting crew to paint the stone exterior of the house in gaudy shades of purple and gold spotlights. They erected a massive tent right in the middle of the rose garden, the award-winning roses Elizabeth had painstakingly cultivated for 2 decades, now ruthlessly trampled into the mud just to make room for a DJ booth and a champagne tower. I watched the luxury cars line up at the gate in a never-ending queue. Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Maybachs. These people weren't my friends. They weren't the titans of industry or low-profile philanthropists I associated with. They were Julian's crowd. Trust fund babies who had never worked a single day in their lives, high society influencers, and coattail riders buzzing around the scent of money like flies. I sat back in the van, adjusting the cuffs of my tuxedo. Eleanor Carter sat across from me, her expression grim as she checked her watch. The FBI tactical team was already in position, seamlessly blended in as catering staff and private security. We were ready, but I needed to wait. I needed the timing to be absolutely perfect. I wanted them at the absolute peak of their arrogance, right when the floor dropped out from under them. On the screen, I watched Julian greeting guests at the door. He was wearing a vintage velvet smoking jacket that belonged to me. The shoulders were entirely too broad for him, making him look like a little kid playing dress-up in his father's closet. He held a glass of scotch, my 30-year-old Macallan, laughing loudly. "Welcome! Welcome!" he shouted to a group that looked like they had just graduated college. "Come on in. Open bar. Everything is on me tonight." I turned up the volume on the audio feed. "Where's the old man?" one of the guests asked, looking around the expansive foyer. I thought this was his place. Julian waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, my dad. He retired. Effective immediately. The stress was getting to him, you know. He went on an extended vacation. He handed the keys to the kingdom over to me and Chloe. We run things around here now. An extended vacation. That was their little code word for death. He was telling his friends I was gone while enjoying the dark thrill of keeping the details to himself. He looked incredibly bulletproof. He truly believed he had executed the perfect crime. He thought he was the new king of Wall Street, crowning himself while standing on the corpse of the old lion. And then Chloe appeared. The moment I saw her, the breath was knocked right out of my lungs. It wasn't a flash of anger this time. It was a sharp, physical ache that pierced straight through the cold armor I had built over the last few days. She wore a low-cut white silk evening gown that shimmered under the crystal chandeliers. But it wasn't the dress that turned my blood to ice. It was what she had around her neck. Pearls, and not just any pearls. It was a triple-strand South Sea pearl necklace fastened with a heavy diamond clasp. I bought that for Elizabeth on our 30th wedding anniversary. I remember personally placing it around her neck, her hands trembling with emotion as she looked at herself in the mirror. She wore it to our son's college graduation. She wore it in the very last family portrait we ever took together. After she passed, I locked it away in the master bedroom wall, safe, intending to pass it down to my future daughter-in-law, assuming Julian married a woman who was actually worthy of Elizabeth's memory. I had never given it to Chloe. She knew that necklace was strictly off limits. She knew it was sacred. Yet here she was, parading it around in front of a room full of strangers. She threw her head back in a loud laugh, letting the pearls bounce against her chest. She sipped her champagne, spilling a few drops onto the floor, treating a priceless heirloom like cheap costume jewelry. It was a total desecration. It was a final parting insult to the memory of the family she had systematically poisoned. Eleanor noticed the change in my expression. She reached across the seat, placing a firm hand on my forearm. "Steady, Arthur," she whispered. "Don't lose focus. Channel that rage." I took a deep, steadying breath, forcing the red mist in front of my eyes to clear. I wasn't going to lose focus. I was going to sharpen it. That necklace was the final nail in her coffin. She wanted to wear the crown. Fine, she could wear the chains that came with it. Inside the house, the music grew progressively louder. The heavy bass vibrated through the walls, shaking the family portraits hanging in the grand hallway. I watched a young woman with blue hair accidentally knock a vase off a side table. It shattered into pieces on the floor. Julian just laughed it off, kicking the shards carelessly beneath a rug. "Who cares?" he shouted. "We'll buy a new one. We'll buy 10. He climbed up onto a chair in the center of the living room, letting out a sharp whistle to command attention. The volume of the music dropped slightly as the crowd turned to face him. He raised his glass high into the air. "Listen up, everyone," he roared. "I want to propose a toast to the future. For years you guys have watched me live in the shadow of the great Arthur Sterling. You watched me beg for scraps. You watched me wait in line. Well, the wait is officially over." The crowd erupted into cheers. Chloe walked over to his side, wrapping her arms around his leg, looking up at him like he was a king. "My father," Julian continued, forcing a look of fake solemnity onto his face, "hasn't been doing well lately. His mind, well, you all know how it is. He was confused, he was lost. A few days ago, he signed everything over to us because deep down, he knew he couldn't handle it anymore. He knew I was the better man for the job." A wave of cynical laughter rippled through the room. "So tonight isn't just a party," he shouted. "This is a coronation. We are $150 million richer than we were on Monday, and this is only the beginning." The room exploded into deafening applause. Champagne corks popped in rapid succession. The crowd began chanting his name in unison. "Julian! Julian! Julian!" I watched him soak in every single second of it. He truly believed he had won because he thought he was smarter, stronger, and simply better. He didn't realize that the only reason he was standing on that chair was because I had built the stage beneath his feet, and I was about to pull the lever on the trapdoor. Special Agent Miller's voice crackled through my earpiece. "Mr. Sterling, teams are in position. The perimeter is fully locked down. Nobody gets out. Do you want us to move in now?" "No," I spoke directly into the microphone hidden in my lapel. "Not yet. I'm going in alone first." Eleanor looked at me with immediate concern. "Arthur, that's dangerous. He's desperate. He might be unstable." "He's a coward, Eleanor," I said, pushing the van door open. "Cowards only bite when you aren't looking. I want him to watch his entire world shatter right in front of his eyes." I stepped out into the cool night air. The muffled bass of the party drifted across the manicured lawn. I straightened my jacket, adjusted my cufflinks, and walked toward the house. I didn't hide in the shadows. I walked right down the center of the driveway, illuminated by the bright security floodlights I had paid for. The gravel crunched sharply beneath my custom leather shoes. A few guests smoking near the fountain caught sight of me. Their conversation died instantly. They squinted through the light, trying to place the steady, powerful presence of the silver-haired man walking toward them. "Is that?" one of them whispered. I ignored them entirely, walking up the stone steps to the massive front doors. A muscular security guard I didn't recognize extended an arm to block my path. "Private party, sir. Invitation only." I stopped and looked at him. I didn't raise my voice. I simply channeled the exact authoritative weight that used to make CEOs freeze in boardrooms. "Take your hand off me," I said calmly, "before you have to explain to a federal judge why you are assaulting a homeowner on his own property." The guard froze. He looked at my face, then back at the door. Recognition hit him hard and his eyes widened. He took a hasty step back, lowering his head. "Mr. Sterling, I didn't realize—" I brushed past him, pushing open the heavy double doors and stepping into the foyer. The noise was deafening. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and smoke. People were dancing in the hallways, and a couple was wrapped around each other on the grand staircase. I stood there, a silent island in the middle of a chaotic ocean. Then I walked straight into the ballroom. The DJ was blasting a heavy track. Julian was still up on that chair, pouring champagne directly into the open mouths of his friends. Chloe was dancing on a table, the pearls bouncing wildly against her gown as she laughed over the noise. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. I walked directly over to the DJ booth. The young kid with headphones around his neck looked up at me with immediate annoyance. "Hey, old man, back away from the gear." I reached down and yanked the main power cable straight out of the amplifier stack. The music died instantly. The sudden silence hit the room like a physical blow, leaving the crowd completely disoriented. They stopped dancing, looking around the room in utter confusion. "Hey!" Julian shouted from the center of the floor. "Who killed the music? Turn it back on." He spun around, looking for the source of the interruption, and then he saw me. I stood right by the DJ booth, bathed in the very spotlight that had been tracking him. I stood completely straight. I was steady. My hands weren't shaking, and I didn't look confused. I looked right at him. The glass of scotch slipped from Julian's hand, shattering completely on the hardwood floor and splashing amber liquid across his expensive shoes. In a single heartbeat, the color drained from his face, leaving him a deathly pale white. His mouth fell open, but he couldn't form a single word. He looked like he was staring at a ghost. Chloe froze on top of the table. She stared at me, her hands snapping up defensively to cover the pearls at her throat, a pure reflex of absolute guilt. The crowd picked up on the sudden, suffocating tension. They followed Julian's gaze, and a heavy silence spread across the room like a ripple until the only sound left was the distant hum of a refrigerator compressor from the kitchen down the hall. "Dad," Julian whispered, his voice incredibly thin and broken. "Hello, son," I said, my calm, cold voice cutting through the quiet room. "I heard you were throwing a party to celebrate my retirement." Julian stumbled off the chair, nearly losing his footing completely before grabbing the shoulder of a guest to steady himself. "But you," he stammered, his eyes darting frantically. "We thought you weren't answering your phone." You thought I was dead?" I finished the sentence for him. "You thought the thallium and the digitalis had finally done their job. You assumed those 3 days of silence meant you were completely in the clear." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. People immediately began backing away from Julian and Chloe, sensing that the party was over and something incredibly dark was unfolding. Julian shook his head frantically. No, Dad. You're confused. That's the dementia talking. You're sick. We've been worried sick about you. We were just—" "Be quiet," I said. The 2 words cut through the air like a whip. I walked toward him, the crowd parting seamlessly like the Red Sea. I stopped 5 feet away from him, turning my gaze to Chloe, who was still frozen on top of the table, trembling. "Take off the necklace, Chloe," I said softly. She gripped the pearls even tighter. This is mine. You gave it to me." "I never gave it to you," I said. "I bought that for a woman who understood the meaning of loyalty. A woman who would have died before hurting her family. You aren't worthy of touching it. Take it off, right now." She fumbled clumsily with the clasp, her fingers shaking too violently to undo it. In a panic, she yanked hard, snapping the silk thread. The pearls cascaded to the floor, bouncing and scattering across the hardwood parquet like shattered marbles. The sharp clicking sound of them hitting the wood was the sound of her entire facade cracking to pieces. Julian took a step forward, a desperate attempt to claw his way back into control. "Dad, listen to me. We need to get you to a doctor right now. You're making a scene in front of everyone. You don't even know what you're saying." I reached into the pocket of my tuxedo and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It wasn't a speech. It was the toxicology report. "I know exactly what I'm saying, Julian," I said, holding the paper high. "I know about the smoothies. I know about your corrupt friend, Dr. Vince. I know about the forged signatures. And I know all about that $150 million federal bait account you transferred money into 3 days ago." Julian's eyes looked ready to pop out of his skull. He looked around the room in absolute terror, catching the horrified stares of his friends and business partners. That's that's a lie, he screamed, his voice cracking under the pressure. He's lost it. He's crazy. Someone call security. Get him out of here. Nobody moved. The guards stood by the doors with their arms crossed. They were on the estate's payroll, and they knew exactly who the true master of this house was. Did you honestly think you could destroy me and just take over my life? I asked, taking a step toward him. Did you think I was just a senile old man you could casually erase? I leaned in closer, dropping my voice to a level only he could hear. But in the dead silence of that room, half the crowd caught every single word. I built this empire by eating men like you for breakfast, Julian. You didn't kill the shark, you just woke him up. Julian glanced toward the doors, measuring his chances of running. He was wondering if he could make a break for it. Don't waste your energy, I told him. Take a look outside. He turned his head toward the expansive windows. Through the glass, the red and blue emergency lights began to flash silently against the dark trees, and a second later, the sharp wail of police sirens pierced the night air. The party's over, son, I said. It's time to settle the bill. The chaos in the ballroom became a living thing, a whirlwind of confusion and frantic whispering circling right around my son. He stood there, completely pale, trying to explain away the emergency lights strobing through the sheer curtains. He kept telling the guests it was all a misunderstanding, a practical joke, a mistake. He was desperate to preserve his illusion of power for just a few more seconds. He held up his hands, shouting for order, yelling at the DJ to put the music back on, screaming that everything was under control. But I was finished with illusions. It was time for hard, undeniable reality to take center stage on a 10-foot screen. Standing in the shadows by the entrance, completely unnoticed by the panicking crowd, I pressed the button on the tiny Bluetooth transmitter in my pocket. That was the cue Eleanor and the tech team had been waiting for. The lights didn't just dim, they died completely. Absolute darkness swallowed the ballroom. The sudden blackness brought the chaotic crowd to an immediate halt. The laughter and the clinking of glasses stopped instantly. For one long heartbeat, there was nothing but the sound of nervous breathing and the rustle of expensive fabrics. Then the massive projection screen Julian had rented to showcase his vanity flashed to life. It was supposed to be playing a slideshow of his luxury cars, vacations, and successes. Instead, the image displayed wasn't a photo of Julian smiling on a yacht. It was a grainy but crystal clear high-definition security feed. The timestamp in the corner read 3 days ago. The setting was my private underground study. As the picture resolved, a collective gasp ripped through the crowd. Everyone recognized the room. Everyone recognized the two people inside it. The audio boomed through the concert-grade sound system Julian had brought in, sharp and clear, leaving absolutely no room for denial. "It's done," Chloe's voice echoed into the dark room. "I doubled the thallium dosage in his smoothie this morning." On screen, the guests watched in horrified fascination as Chloe held up a small glass vial, swirling the powder inside so it caught the light. She looked completely detached, a twisted smile on her face that lacked even a shred of humanity. "How much longer?" Julian's voice came through the speakers. It was the voice of a man eager to collect an inheritance. "Dr. Vince said 3 days," the on-screen Chloe replied. "The thallium will slowly break down his nervous system. Then the digitalis will trigger an arrhythmia. It'll look exactly like a natural heart attack. The old man won't even know what hit him. He'll just go to sleep, and we'll wake up billionaires." I watched the crowd by the blue glow reflecting off the massive screen. I saw their faces. I saw the disgust. I saw the shock. People who had been drinking Julian's champagne just 5 minutes earlier were now covering their mouths in horror. They weren't looking at a party host anymore. They were looking at a monster. The video cut to another clip. This time it showed Julian sitting at my desk, forging my signature. "I just need to get the loop on this letter right," he muttered on screen. "Once I sign this power of attorney, we can drain the liquid accounts before the funeral home even picks up the body." The video cut to black. The silence that followed was heavier than the darkness itself. It was the dead quiet of a courtroom, right before the gavel falls. The silence of judgment. Then a single piercing spotlight cut through the dark, focusing right on the center of the stage. But Julian wasn't standing there. He had backed away toward the champagne tower, trembling like a rat caught in a searchlight. The spotlight found me. I stepped out from behind the double doors. I didn't walk like the weak, confused old man they had heard about in the rumors. I didn't use a cane. I didn't hold the slouched, fragile posture I had intentionally faked for the last 6 months. I wore a tuxedo custom-tailored for me in London 20 years ago, an armor of black wool and silk. My spine was straight as steel, and my head was held high. I walked with the steady grace of a predator, the man who built this estate from nothing, the man who had survived market crashes and hostile takeovers. I cut through the crowd. People instinctively stepped back, scrambling out of my path as if my presence alone carried a physical force. Nobody said a word. The steady click of my leather shoes against the marble floor echoed like a metronome, counting down the final seconds of my son's freedom. I saw former business partners in the crowd, men who had avoided my calls recently, assuming I was losing my mind. They lowered their heads, unable to meet my eyes. I saw the socialites who had fawned over Chloe, already trying to slip toward the exits. I reached the front of the stage. I climbed the steps one by one, completely at ease. I walked past the terrified DJ, who was visibly shaking, and stepped up to the microphone stand in the center. I took the microphone. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked directly at Julian. He was trembling, his body experiencing physical spasms from pure terror. His face was a mask of sweat and tears. Chloe had collapsed onto the floor beside him, weeping hysterically, her makeup ruined as black mascara ran down her cheeks. Her stolen pearls were scattered around her knees like broken teeth. I brought the microphone to my lips. My voice was calm, the voice of a man who had already done his mourning and had nothing left to lose. "You threw my funeral a bit early, didn't you?" The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. Julian let out a weak, pathetic whimper. "Dad, please, it was a joke. It's all a misunderstanding." I smiled, but the warmth never reached my eyes. "A misunderstanding?" I repeated. "You call an attempt on my life a misunderstanding, Julian? You call feeding heavy metals to the father who raised you alone a misunderstanding? You call forging my signature to steal $150 million from a federal sting account a misunderstanding?" A chaotic murmur erupted through the crowd as the words 150 million and federal sting swept through the room. I pointed to the darkened screen behind me. "You wanted a show, Julian. You wanted to be the star. Well, here is your standing ovation." I turned my gaze to the guests. "Get out," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the very back of the room. "This is no longer a party. This is a crime scene. Anyone who stays will be treated as an accessory." Absolute chaos broke loose. People began to run. The high society politeness vanished instantly as guests shoved and pushed each other to reach the front doors. But the doors didn't open. The FBI agents disguised as security guards stepped forward, blocking the exits. Agent Miller walked onto the stage. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He wore his windbreaker with the bright yellow letters FBI stamped across the back. "Julian Sterling," he announced, his voice booming over the noise without even needing a microphone. "Chloe Sterling, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and money laundering." Julian tried to run. It was a pathetic attempt. He scrambled toward the kitchen doors, slipping on the champagne-soaked floor and knocking over a tray of hors d'oeuvres. 2 agents pinned him down in a matter of seconds. They slammed him against the wall, the impact rattling the expensive art frames. I watched as they pulled his arms behind his back. I heard the metallic click of handcuffs snapping into place. It was the sound I had been imagining for 3 days, but hearing it in reality didn't bring me joy. It brought nothing but a deep, hollow sense of finality. Chloe screamed as a female agent pulled her off the floor. She was kicking and spitting, completely reduced to a frantic state. She looked at me, her eyes wild. "You did this," she shrieked. "You lied to us. You set us up." I walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at her. "I didn't lie to you, Chloe," I said. "I just handed you a rope. You're the ones who decided to tie the knot. You're the ones who decided my life was worth less than a bank transfer." Julian was crying now, begging frantically as the agents dragged him toward the exit. "Dad! Dad, stop them! I'm your son! You can't let them take me. I'm your son. I looked at him. I looked at the face that shared my features, the eyes that were the exact shade of blue as his mother's. I felt a phantom pain in my chest, the ghost of the love I used to have for him. I used to have a son, I said, my voice cracking for the very first time. He was a good boy. He liked baseball. He loved his mother. But that boy died a long time ago. I don't know who you are, but you are not my son. You're just a thief who broke into my house. I turned my back on them. Take them away, I told Agent Miller. I stood on that stage and watched the room empty out. I stood there as my son was dragged from the home he grew up in, screaming my name until his voice went raw. I stood there as the guests were questioned and released, ducking their heads as they filed out into the night, terrified of the scandal that would headline the news by morning. I was left completely alone in the ruins of the party. The floor was sticky with champagne, and the flowers were crushed into the ground. The air smelled of sweat and panic. Eleanor walked up onto the stage, looking exhausted. "Are you all right, Arthur?" she asked. I looked around the empty ballroom, staring at the screen that had just played the evidence of my attempted murder. "No, Eleanor," I said. "I'm not. I just sent my only son to prison for the rest of his life." I walked down the stairs and picked up a single stray pearl from the floor. It felt cold and heavy in my hand. "But I am alive," I whispered. "And for tonight, that is enough." I walked toward the front doors, stepping over the shattered remains of a celebration that never truly belonged to them. I needed fresh air. I needed to wash the scent of this house off my skin. I stepped out into the night, walking past the police cruisers and the flashing lights. I looked up at the stars. They were the exact same stars I looked at when I was young, full of ambition and hope. I am old now. I am completely alone, but I am finally free. As the sirens faded into the distance, carrying the poison out of my life, I took my first clean breath of air in 6 months. The shark is still swimming, and the ocean remains vast and wide. The heavy silence that settled over the ballroom was like fragile glass, and my son's explosive reaction was the hammer that shattered it completely. He stared dead at me, his chest heaving violently, his eyes darting frantically between my face, the toxicology report in my hand, and the crowd of guests who were now looking at him with a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity. The reality of his situation crashed down on him like an avalanche, ripping away his carefully constructed cloak of arrogance and exposing the terrified, cornered animal underneath. He realized there was no way to talk his way out of this. No amount of charm could erase the security footage or rewrite the chemical analysis in my hands. He broke. A primal, guttural roar tore from deep inside his throat, a scream of pure, helpless fury. He didn't run. He lunged straight at me. "You're lying!" he shrieked, his hands curling into claws as he threw himself forward. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to silence the voice that was tearing his perfect life to shreds. He scrambled clumsily up the steps of the stage. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't even raise my hands to defend myself. I didn't need to. 2 dark figures stepped seamlessly out from the shadows on either side of the stage. They were members of my private security detail, retired Navy SEAL veterans who had been with me for a decade. They stepped into the light. Marcus, a man built like a solid brick wall, simply extended a single heavy arm. It was an incredibly casual movement, almost effortless, but it hit Julian square in the chest with the force of a concrete block. Julian slammed into his arm and collapsed instantly onto the floor, the air driven completely from his lungs with a ragged gasp. Marcus didn't strike him. He just held him there, pinning him flat against his own complete helplessness. Julian struggled frantically, throwing wild, uncoordinated punches that struck nothing but empty air, screaming absolute filth that echoed all the way up to the vaulted ceilings. It was pathetic. He looked exactly like a toddler throwing a tantrum because he was told it was bedtime. Except this toddler was 34 years old and had just tried to end his father's life. I looked down at him. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel fear. I only felt a deep, exhausting sense of pity. "Let him go," I told Marcus. Marcus stepped back. Julian remained collapsed on the floor, dropping to his knees and gasping for breath, glaring up at me with eyes full of pure hatred. I turned back to face the crowd. I needed to finish this. I had to ensure that when these people left my house, there would be no whispers, no rumors, nothing left but the cold, hard, undeniable truth. I signaled to the technician at the control board. The screen behind me shifted instantly. The video of the poisoning vanished, replaced by a static image. It was a screenshot of a bank transaction log. The crowd squinted against the bright glare. They were wealthy people. They understood finance. They knew how wire transfers worked, and they read the data on the screen immediately. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady and amplified through the house speakers, "what you see behind me is a record of a transaction that took place 3 days ago. My son and his wife, believing I was lying incapacitated in a hotel room, used stolen credentials to access what they believed that was a hidden offshore account. I walked over to Julian, who was still kneeling on the floor, and pointed the microphone toward him like an accusing sword. He transferred $150 million, I continued. He thought he was stealing my retirement. He thought he was securing his future. But in his frantic greed, he failed to notice the most fatal detail about the account he accessed. I paused, letting the suffocating tension build in the room. Chloe struggled to her feet. Her hair was completely disheveled, the hem of her expensive gown torn, but her face still held a look of desperate defiance. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "The money is ours," she shrieked, her voice pitched in near hysteria. "The money is sitting right in our Bahamas account. I saw the confirmation screen. The transfer cleared successfully. You can't touch it. It belongs to us. Even if we go to prison, we'll come out as billionaires. We won." She looked around the room, desperate for validation. "Tell him, Julian," she screamed at her husband. "Tell him the money is safe." Julian looked up, a tiny flicker of hope returning to his eyes. "She's right," he spat, wiping blood from his bitten lip. The transfer went through. We moved it to an offshore bank in a jurisdiction with no extradition treaty. You can't touch that money. You can arrest us, but you can never touch that capital. I looked at the two of them and then I smiled, a dry, entirely humorless expression. "You two truly don't understand, do you?" I asked. "You think you're playing chess, but you don't even understand checkers. You're just swallowing the pieces whole." I looked back at the display. "Next slide," I ordered. The screen changed. It was no longer a bank statement. It was a formal, official document issued jointly by the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice, dated 5 years ago. It was a settlement agreement outlining a massive antitrust fine and back taxes related to the international holdings of my early logistics empire. I turned back to the audience. 5 years ago, I reached a settlement with the Department of Justice regarding certain disputed capital gains and antitrust litigation from the 90s. The settlement amount was exactly $150 million. We established a restricted escrow account to hold that payment, an account completely under the highest level of federal observation. I turned my gaze directly to Chloe. Her face turned an absolute ash gray. "The account you hacked into," I said, leaning directly into the microphone. "The account you drained, that wasn't my private stash. That was the escrow account designated for payment to the United States Department of Justice and the IRS." A sharp wave of gasps erupted through the room. A few people in the back even let out nervous, stunned laughter, a sound of sheer disbelief. "When you hit that transfer button," I continued, my voice turning to cold iron, "you didn't steal $150 million from me. You willingly paid my federal settlement for me." Julian's jaw dropped. He stared at the screen, then back at me, trying to comprehend the sheer magnitude of his fatal error. "No," he whispered. "No, that's impossible." "It's entirely possible, son," I said. "In fact, I received a confirmation email from my tax attorney just this morning. The federal government accepted the wire. My debt is entirely cleared, and because the capital was routed from an account securely tied to your identities through your own wire fraud, the government considers the payment final and irrevocable." I took a step toward Chloe. "So thank you, my dear daughter-in-law. You wanted my money. Instead, you just became the most generous donor to the United States Treasury in the history of this family. You aren't billionaires. You are completely broke. and you just cleared all my liabilities." Chloe let out a scream that didn't even sound human. It sounded like a high-pressure valve bursting open. She threw herself onto Julian, violently hammering her fists against his chest. "You idiot!" she shrieked. "You told me that was his secret vault. You told me it was untraceable. You gave everything away to them." Julian shoved her off, staring down at his own hands as if they were covered in blood. "I didn't know," he stammered. "The notebook? The black leather book? It was marked A.S. Black Box." I shook my head. "You only read the cover, Julian. You never bothered to read the fine print. That has always been your greatest flaw." I wasn't done yet. I had one final card to play, one last turn of the knife to ensure there was absolutely no escape for them. I pulled a folded document from my tuxedo pocket. "There is one last thing," I said. The room fell into absolute silence once more. Even Chloe stopped screaming. "You've been shouting and screaming about this house," I said, gesturing to the grand ballroom, the chandeliers and the marble floors. "You've been telling people to get out of your house. You've been talking all about your inheritance." I unfolded the paper, revealing a formal deed of sale. "At 9 o'clock this morning I sold this estate," I announced. Julian's head snapped up, his eyes completely bloodshot. "What? You can't—" "The family trust? I dissolved the trust 3 days ago, the moment I secured proof that you were trying to end my life." I cut him off. "And this morning I signed the transfer papers with the Texas State Parks and Wildlife Department. They plan to turn this entire land into a nature preserve open to the public, alongside a community center for at-risk youth." I held the document up for everyone to see clearly. "This property no longer belongs to the Sterling name. It belongs to the state of Texas. Technically, that means every single person in this room is currently trespassing on government land. But more importantly, it means you, Julian, and you, Chloe, have committed breaking and entering." I looked out at the guests. "If I were you, I'd leave immediately. The new owners take legal liability very seriously." That was the breaking point. The money was gone. The house was sold. The party was a lie. It was simply too much for anyone to process. The crowd completely turned on them. The very friends who had been drinking their champagne just minutes ago began to boo loudly. Someone threw a glass, and it shattered violently at Chloe's feet. "You're a complete loser, Julian," someone shouted from the back. "You tried to take out your dad for absolutely nothing," another voice yelled. Julian stood in the center of the ruins of his life. He looked incredibly small. He looked completely broken. He looked up at me with pleading eyes. "Dad, where am I supposed to go? You sold the house. You paid the fines with the money. Where do I go?" I looked at him, and for a split second, I remembered the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. And in that exact moment, I personally laid that memory to rest forever. "You're going to prison, son," I said. "The good news is the rent is entirely free." I turned to Agent Miller, who had been standing quietly at the edge of the stage, watching the entire scene play out. "They're all yours, Agent." Miller signaled to his team. 4 tactical agents moved forward, their actions crisp and efficient. They secured Julian and Chloe. This time, there was absolutely no resistance left in them. They went completely limp, crushed under the absolute weight of their own foolishness. As Chloe was dragged past me, she lifted her head. Her mascara was completely smeared, her hair a total mess. She looked at me with eyes full of pure venom. "I hope you rot," she hissed. I smiled, leaning down to whisper right into her ear. "I plan on living a very long time, Chloe. My heart is a lot stronger than you think, especially now that I've flushed out all the poison." I watched them get dragged through the grand double doors and out into the night, straight toward the flashing red and blue lights of the waiting cruisers. The crowd automatically parted for them, pulling out their phones to stream their downfall live to the world. I stood on that stage alone. The house was sold. My son was gone. My debts were cleared. I had personally burned everything to ash. Yet as I looked out at the empty, silent ballroom, I realized one thing. In my entire life, I had never felt so wealthy. The red and blue emergency lights strobed across the high ceilings of the ballroom, turning the crystal chandeliers into a dizzying blur of flashing judgment. The party was gone. The music was dead. In this cavernous room, The only sound left was the static hiss of police radios and the heavy, ragged breathing of my son as two federal agents held him flat against the cold marble floor. I stood near the grand winding staircase, watching the scene play out with a sense of detachment that surprised even me. For years, I spent every waking moment worrying about Julian. I worried about his grades, his reckless driving, his bottomless gambling debts, and his failed crypto investments. I spent countless nights pacing my room, terrified of getting a call from a hospital or a police station telling me something terrible had happened to him. Now, watching him pinned to the ground, his velvet tuxedo torn at the shoulder and his expensive loafers kicked off in the struggle, I realized that anxiety was completely gone. It was replaced by the numb certainty a surgeon feels after amputating a dead limb. Agent Miller stood over him, reading his rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Julian wasn't remaining silent. He was weeping into the hardwood, letting out a hollow, pathetic wail that grated on my nerves. "Dad!" he howled. "Dad, please tell them it's a mistake. Tell them I didn't mean it. We can fix this. I'll sign the money back. I'll do whatever you want." I didn't answer. I didn't even look at him. My eyes were on Chloe. She was being held by a female agent near the ruins of the Champagne Tower. She wasn't crying. She was snarling. The mask of the dutiful daughter-in-law, the polished high society lady, had completely dissolved. In its place was the face of a cornered animal. She spat insults at the agents, threatening to sue them, claiming she knew congressmen and judges who would have their badges by morning. Eleanor Carter walked into the center of the room. Dressed in her dark suit, she looked like a grim undertaker, holding her leather legal portfolio with the solemnity of a priest holding a Bible. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at the two prisoners. "Save your breath, Mrs. Sterling," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through Chloe's screams like a razor. "You'll need it for the interrogation room." Eleanor flipped open her portfolio. She didn't look at me. She looked straight at Julian. "Julian Sterling," she began, reading from the documents with an incredibly dry, mechanical precision. "You are facing the following charges: 1 count of attempted first-degree murder, 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder, 1 count of federal wire fraud involving an amount exceeding $150 million, 1 count of aggravated identity theft, and 1 count of fraud against the United States government." Julian lifted his head, his face smeared with tears and dust. "How long?" he choked out. "How long does all that carry?" Eleanor didn't blink. Given the amount and the target, the sentencing guidelines for the wire fraud count alone carry a mandatory minimum of 20 years. Combine that with the attempted murder of a family member using a chemical agent, and because you purchased that thallium across state lines online, it constitutes a major federal offense. The judge is highly likely to run your sentences consecutively. You are looking at 25 years to life, Julian, with a mandatory requirement to serve at least 85% of that sentence before you are even eligible for parole. 25 years. I watched that number hit my son. I saw his eyes roll back slightly as his body went limp under the crushing weight of reality. He was 34 years old. By the time he ever had a chance to see the world outside a prison wall again, he would be an old man close to my current age. He would miss the absolute prime of his life. He would miss the way the world changes. He would rot in a cage, exactly as I promised. But Chloe was different. She wasn't even listening to Julian's sentence. She was calculating. I could see her eyes darting back and forth. She thought she could turn state's evidence. She thought she could pin it all on him. "It was his idea!" she screamed, fighting against her handcuffs. "Julian made me do it. He bought the chemicals. He forged the signatures. I'm just his wife. I didn't know anything." Eleanor turned her gaze toward her. She smiled, a faint, entirely humorless expression. "We fully anticipated that defense, Chloe," Eleanor said softly, "which is why our background check on you was exceptionally thorough." She turned a page in her folder. "Chloe Verez, married name Chloe Sterling. You entered the United States 6 years ago on an O-1 visa for extraordinary modeling talent. After that visa expired, you adjusted your status based on your marriage to a United States citizen, Julian Sterling. So what? Chloe spat. I have a green card. I'm a legal resident. You can't touch me. Ah, actually, Eleanor corrected her, her voice dropping an octave into a tone of pure danger. Your permanent residency is conditional. It is dependent upon you maintaining good moral character and the ongoing validity of your marriage. By conspiring to murder your husband's father to steal an inheritance, you have committed a crime of moral turpitude under United States immigration law. Chloe stopped struggling. She became deathly quiet. Furthermore, Eleanor continued, seemingly enjoying every syllable, since you have not yet naturalized as a U.S. citizen, a felony conviction, which an attempted murder charge absolutely is, automatically triggers deportation proceedings. Deportation, she whispered, the word hanging in the air, sounding small and terrified. Yes, Eleanor said, snapping her portfolio shut. You won't be going to a standard federal prison, Chloe. You will serve your time as an accessory, likely 15 years, and the exact millisecond your sentence is complete, you will be remanded to the custody of Immigration and Customs Enforcement and put directly on a plane back to your country of origin, stripped of residency, stripped of all assets, permanently barred from ever re-entering the United States. No, Chloe gasped. You can't do that. I have nothing left there. My family. I haven't spoken to them in years. I can't go back. You should have considered that before you started pouring thallium powder into a blender, Mrs. Sterling, Eleanor said, turning her back on her. The agents pulled them up. It was time to go. I turned away. I couldn't watch them walk out the door. I walked toward the French double doors leading to the balcony. I needed air. I needed to escape the suffocating stench of their desperation. I stepped onto the balcony. The night air was crisp and cool, carrying the slight dampness of Lake Travis, acting as a sharp contrast to the heavy atmosphere inside. I walked to the stone railing and looked down at the driveway. From this height, the police cruisers looked like toys. I watched the agents guide Julian and Chloe toward the waiting vehicles. They looked small, entirely insignificant. They weren't the powerful business disruptors they thought they were. They weren't the criminal masterminds who had fooled an old man. They were just two greedy children who reached for the sun and burned their hands to ash. I saw Julian stop just before the open door of the cruiser. He looked up. He scanned the facade of the house, searching for me. I took a step forward, putting myself directly into the light so he could have one final look at me. He froze. Even from this distance, I could feel his gaze lock onto me. He opened his mouth to shout something, maybe a plea, maybe a curse. But an agent pressed a hand to the top of his head, guiding him into the back seat. The door slammed shut with a heavy final thud, the sound of a vault locking into place. Then Chloe was loaded into the second car. She was kicking at the window, screaming silently behind the glass. The convoy began to move, their sirens letting out a few short yelps. I watched the red taillights snake down the long driveway, passing through the manicured trees, out the iron gates, and onto the main road. I kept watching until they were just pinpricks of light in the distance, until they completely vanished into the night. They were gone. My house was empty. My family was no more. I turned back toward the room. The ballroom was quiet now. The agents were packing away their equipment. A few disoriented catering staff were sweeping up the broken glass. I walked over to the desk where Julian had been sitting earlier. The bottle of Romani Conti, the 1990 vintage Chloe had been drinking straight from in the footage, sat there uncorked, letting the wine breathe. This was the wine they opened to celebrate my death. This was what she poured down her throat while laughing about my heart stopping. I walked behind the bar, grabbed a clean glass, and poured myself a generous measure. The liquid was deep red, the color of blood, the color of life. I walked back out to the balcony, raising my glass toward the moon. To Arthur Sterling, I whispered to the empty night. I took a sip. It was exceptionally smooth. It tasted of blackberries, of oak, of the earth. But most of all, it tasted like survival. I didn't cry. I had already cried all my tears in the doctor's office during those lonely nights when I realized my son was a stranger. Tonight, there were no tears left. There was only a cold, hard satisfaction that comes with a ledger that balances perfectly at 0. I finished the wine and set the glass down on the stone railing. Tomorrow, The real work begins. I have a house to clear out. I have a new charitable foundation to pour my energy into. I have my own life to rediscover. But tonight, I was just a man standing on a balcony, breathing in air that didn't taste like poison. I turned my back on the driveway and walked inside. I didn't look back. There was nothing left behind me worth saving. The only thing that mattered now was the future. And for the first time in all these years, the future belongs entirely to me. The sunshine out here on Carmel Beach in California is a completely different world from that baking, relentless Texas heat. It's mild, clear, and bathes everything in a bright, clean light. Standing on the terrace of my newly purchased beachfront villa, I watch the distant sailboats slice through the deep blue of the Pacific. The air is thick with the scent of sea salt and pine needles, a profound contrast to the stagnant odor of old money and hidden corruption I had grown so used to back at the Austin estate. It has been exactly 1 year since the lights went out in that ballroom. 1 year since I watched the flashing red and blue emergency lights carry my past away into the dark. I turn back into the living room. The space is modern, open and flooded with natural light, decorated with artwork I bought purely to please myself, rather than antiques meant to pad an investment portfolio. There are no dark corners here, no hidden cameras, and no panic rooms. I simply don't need them anymore. The only object kept from my old life is the framed toxicology report hanging on my office wall, a stark reminder of the exact price of blind trust. Other than that, I only brought the people who actually mattered. Jorge walks out of the kitchen, balancing a tray of iced tea, humming a light tune in Spanish. Back at the old house, he was always so guarded, walking on eggshells, but out here he's vibrant and full of life. He sets the tray down on the glass coffee table. His 19-year-old daughter, Elena, is staring intently at the chessboard in front of her. She's now a straight-A honors student in the computer engineering department at Stanford. "Mr. Sterling," Jorge smiles, looking over at me, "are you going to let her win one today? She just pulled straight A's on her finals last week." I walk over and take my seat opposite the girl studying the board. Elena is in a tough spot. Her king is cornered, but she has a single knight left that could turn the entire match around, if she can see the bigger picture. "In this house, Jorge," I say, looking directly at Elena, "we don't hand out anything that isn't earned on merit. If victory is served to you on a silver platter, it loses all its flavor. Right, Elena?" Elena looks up, her dark eyes flashing with pure determination. "Right, Mr. Sterling. I'm going to beat you, fair and square." I smile. That is exactly the kind of spirit I want to pass down. I watch her analyze the board. She's brilliant, far sharper than Julian ever was at her age. I'm not just paying her tuition in full, I've established a venture trust for her. It's not money for her to buy sports cars. It's there to fund her tech research, lab rentals, and future startups. I'm investing in her mind, not indulging her privilege. As she moves her bishop, my thoughts drift back to a letter I received yesterday. The return address read ADX, Florence Federal Penitentiary in Colorado. The sender was just a number, inmate 85934-011. Julian. I didn't open it. I didn't need to read it to know what was inside. The first few letters were filled with rage, shifting blame and hollow threats. Then they turned into bartering, vows of reformation, and begging for money so he could pay for protection inside. And now I imagine the letters are just the empty echoes of a broken soul finally realizing that the world has moved on without him. Eleanor told me that Julian is currently working in the prison laundry, making 23 cents an hour. At that rate, it will take him hundreds of thousands of years to earn back what he tried to steal in 4 minutes. As for Chloe, she has vanished completely. After her plea deal fell through, she was forcefully deported 3 months ago. The last I heard, she was back in a run-down town in her home country, working as a clerk in a discount clothing store. She tells anyone who will listen about her time as an elite American socialite, and people just laugh behind her back. Elna moves her knight. "Check," she says confidently. I look down. It's a risky move, a sacrifice. She's baiting me to take her queen so she can flank me with her rook. I let out a soft chuckle. "Very good, Elena. you're learning the most important lesson of all: sacrifice. You must be willing to lose something of value if you want to win the war. I move my king out of danger, taking a sip of my iced tea. It's sweet, cold, and entirely safe. Now, every single time I take a drink, I spend a second appreciating the pure taste, completely free of that bitter metallic tang. It took me 6 months of excruciating blood dialysis and intensive chelation therapy to completely flush the toxins from my body. My heart has mostly recovered. The arrhythmias are gone, though the scar tissue remains. But I wear those scars like medals. They are proof that I survived the assassins sleeping in my own guest room. Jorge sits down on the sofa nearby, picking up a book. We are a strange family: an old white billionaire, a Mexican ranch foreman, and his college student daughter. We share no bloodline, we don't share a last name, but we share something far more powerful than biology. We share loyalty. Jorge saved my life with a single text message to warn me he risked his job, his housing, and potentially his daughter's future. That loyalty is worth more than all the DNA in the world. People always say blood is thicker than water. They say family always comes first. They are wrong. Blood is just biology, an accident of birth. You don't choose your parents, and you don't choose your children. But loyalty? Loyalty is a choice. It is a deliberate, conscious act of devotion. It's standing next to someone when it's dangerous, not just when it's profitable. I look at Elena. She's biting her lip, calculating her next move. She isn't thinking about how much money I have. She isn't wondering when I'm going to pass away so she can take my Rolex. She's just thinking about the game. She respects the rules. I reach out and move my rook, putting pressure on her defensive line. You know, Elena, I say softly, my son used to play chess with me, but he never wanted to learn strategy. He just wanted to kick my king over and declare himself the winner. He thought the rules didn't apply to him. Elena looks up. Where is he now, Mr. Sterling? In a place that has nothing but rules, I say. A place where he has a lot of time to think about the difference between being a vain, false king and being a piece of actual value. I lean back in my chair. The ocean breeze drifts through the open French doors, rustling the curtains. I feel a sense of peace I never found in boardrooms or on the trading floors of Wall Street. I sold the Austin estate to the state of Texas, just as promised. Ground broke on the Sterling Youth Center last week. It will serve thousands of kids just like Elena, who simply need an opportunity. My legacy won't be a decaying dynasty of spoiled heirs. It will be a foundation of hope. As for the $150 million, the money Julian tried to steal, the IRS was confused at first, but once the dust settled, they credited the payment toward my projected taxes for the next decade. In a way, Julian did me a massive favor. He prepaid all my bills for the rest of my life. Elena's hand hovers over the board. Her eyes widen. She sees it. The tiny vulnerability I left for her. A hairline fracture in my defense. But she has to be brave enough to take the victory. Go ahead, I whisper, encouraging her. Don't hesitate. When you see the opening for the definitive strike, you take it. Elena grabs her queen. She slides it across the board, making a satisfying, sharp click as it lands. Checkmate, she says, a massive smile breaking across her face. I look down at the board. She's right. My king is completely trapped. No escape. I burst out laughing, a genuine, deep laugh that sends the seagulls scattered from the railing. It's the first time I've lost a chess match in 20 years, and it feels like the greatest victory of my life. I reach across the table and shake her hand. Beautifully played, kid, I say. Beautifully played. I stand up and walk to the balcony railing, looking out where the ocean meets the horizon. I am 69 years old. I lost my wife. I lost my biological son. I lost the life I thought I wanted. But standing here, bathed in the warmth of the sun, listening to the light laughter of Jorge and Elena behind me, I realize I found something infinitely better. I found the truth. I turn back, breaking the fourth wall one last time to face the camera. My face is weathered, lined with the marks of 1,000 corporate battles. But my eyes are completely clear. People always say the cost of betrayal is heavy. It destroys trust, breaks hearts, and ruins lives. But they forget to tell you the other side of the coin. The cost of betrayal is also absolute clarity. It burns away every single lie until only what is real remains. I look back at the chessboard where the white king sits pulled over on its side. My son wanted my kingdom. He wanted the crown, but he forgot that a king without loyal subjects is just an insecure man in a funny hat, heading straight for checkmate. I didn't destroy him. I just let him play by his own rules until he ran out of board. I smile, a real warm smile that goes all the way to my eyes. Checkmate, Julian. I turn and walk back inside, heading toward the true family I chose for myself. The screen fades to black, leaving only the sound of waves crashing against the rocks and the steady, powerful beat of a heart that refused to stop. The most painful lesson I learned at 69 wasn't about money or business. It was about the absolute myth of unconditional family obligation. We are taught from childhood that we must support our family no matter what. But that is a highly dangerous narrative. Love should never be a suicide pact. If someone hands you poison, whether it's a chemical substance in a teacup or the toxicity of psychological abuse, you have every right to smash that glass and walk away. Protecting your inner peace isn't selfish. It is a matter of survival. True family isn't defined by the names on a birth certificate. True family is the person who holds your hand when the darkness completely closes in. I hope my story gives you the strength to set the boundaries you truly deserve. If you've ever had to make the difficult choice to cut out a toxic family member to protect yourself, leave your story in the comments below. I read every single one personally. Like and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and survival. Until next time, take care of yourselves and always watch your back.